Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. This is about the time when I used to work as a stripper in one of the strip clubs in Las Vegas, and it had only been a month since I started. Whenever I share my stripper stories with people, the most common question I get is, there are many jobs that you can do to earn money, so why are you stripping? Honestly, being a runaway from an orphanage and struggling to survive till you get 20 years old, you get a few ideas on where you could get good money. And for me, stripping seemed far better than stealing from people. Anyway, so I was pretty new to this stripper thing, and trust me, I saw a competition between those women who were working there. So they were no help at all, except for one girl, Kara. She seemed shy for a stripper, and after talking to her a few times, I found out it could be months for her since she started working there. The other girls were like hawks. They could tell by looking at a man how much money he'd be willing to throw on them, and what moves were best to get them to pull out their money. Since I had always been the kind of girl who learned by watching others, it wasn't hard for me to pick up on those moves myself. People coming here were all looking for fun and stuff, so it wasn't that big of a deal to wrap them around your fingers after showing some unique combination of moves. So slowly, I started to beat those girls and getting the most tips around the club. I often sneaked a few dollars and shared them with Kara later. The work in the club was strictly business, so outside that place, I was an entirely different person with dignity and all. I stopped telling people what I do for a living after giving a few negative responses, and even though stripping is still so common in Las Vegas, people's opinions of someone like me weren't pleasant ones. It sometimes stung when I saw the hungry look in those men's eyes in the club, who saw us as nothing more than prostitutes. But I tried to ignore it as much as I could. I remember the last time when I revealed my profession to someone. It was the guy that I had recently started dating, and he ended things with me the same moment by saying, "I don't think any man in their right mind would want to have a serious committed relationship with a girl like you." I'll admit, it hurt as hell, but I got over it pretty soon and decided I would never date. It was not for me whatsoever. I'm grateful for earlier. I turned as Kara's timid voice fell on my ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tried not to look in her eyes. "I know you took the blame in front of the managers, knowing it was me who stole the money," she said softly while looking down. "I didn't. But now that you mention it, let me suggest that keep it to yourself." I walked away after saying that, but I could feel her gaze on my back the entire time. It was earlier that night when we were performing on stage. I went to the restroom, and when I was coming back, I saw Kara sliding dollar bills inside her bra, which were more than what she usually stole. After that, she went to the restroom, and I knew where she was going to hide the money. I knew she was having some problem at home because her brother was in a coma and all, so I acted as if I didn't see anything. But what I didn't know was that the money she stole had already been counted by the manager, and when he started asking questions, one of the older bitches ratted the two of us out, saying she'd been sliding money before. I took it. As I saw him leaning on Kara, whose face was getting paler by the minute, I shouted. He jolted his head back to me and walked over. "Where is it?" he asked in a loud, angry voice. But instead of replying, I stayed silent. Smack! A sharp slap came across my face, causing my jaws a stinging pain. "I'm asking where you put the money, bitch." He then grabbed my hair, pulled it back, and screamed in my face. I stayed silent, because I couldn't tell what I didn't have. But then another slap came right on the other cheek of my face, leaving the mark of his fingers on it. "Julie, strip this bitch, every single cloth, and check if she's hiding it in there somewhere." As he said that, she came forward with an evil smirk on her face, and even though she knew I never stripped naked even while performing, she did just that. A single tear of humiliation fell from my left eye as she searched my body, with every eye on the room on me. As I mentioned before, whatever I did here was strictly professional, and I never did such a thing when not working. So the rage I felt at that moment was beyond what one could imagine. He threatened me a few more times, but when I still didn't open my mouth after going through such humiliation, he let me go while saying he was going to deduct the money from my pay. After Kara apologized to me, I went straight to my apartment, but I couldn't sleep thinking of whatever I just went through. It was when I came across an article that more than 200 people vanish each month in Las Vegas without a trace or possibility of coming back. I got an idea of what to do. The girl who ratted me out was Julie, and looking at how much she was enjoying ripping my clothes off my body, I had to teach her a lesson. Luckily for me, I knew where she lived. Not so much for her though. Her apartment was within 10 minutes of walking distance from the club, so I went straight to her place. By living on the streets and breaking into people's houses to steal, I had learned a thing or two, so unlocking her door and walking in there was a piece of cake. I was startled by a few muffling sounds, so I tried to listen closely, only to realize it was moaning and panting sounds coming out of her bedroom. I went ahead to watch the show. When I saw the manager on top of Julie, my blood started to boil. So these two were having an affair all this time. That was why she was so smug about ruining our lives. I grabbed the half-filled wine bottle that was on the kitchen top from the base in my other hand. I sneaked in there when they didn't notice, and by the time they could realize, I broke the wine bottle on the manager's head. Just before Julie could scream, I hit her with the vase. The two of them passed out that instant. I knew very well that they were just unconscious and not dead, but I wasn't going to let this chance go. I grabbed all the alcohol bottles from the kitchen and emptied its contents throughout the room. After starting a fire, I locked the bedroom from the outside and leaked the gas pipes in the kitchen before exiting her apartment. I was thinking of only scaring Julie by making her think that she was kidnapped, but the rage I felt after watching the two of them together brought back all the memories of their slaps and humiliation, and that turned me into an arsonist. Hey Kara, listen, do you want to move to New York with me? I think your brother could get better treatment there, and we could find a better strip club than this one too. What do you say? I called Kara as I was walking back to my apartment. Well, she didn't agree after all and said she would continue to work in Las Vegas, but would try to look for a better job than stripping. And I moved to New York the very next day since I didn't want to get caught after killing two people who bullied me. I still wonder how come police didn't find me. I know what I would have been seen as the prime suspect if a proper investigation was to be held. Maybe the owner of the club had something to do with it. Who knows? But whatever, it's in my favor. So who cares?
Donna? As I saw her figure amidst the crowd, I rushed there. Jack, where are you going? I was in the middle of talking. Jack! I heard my date calling me from behind, but I ignored her since finding Donna was more important to me than dating. I looked around for several hours as the crowd started to fade, and there was no sign of her. Did I imagine it? Was I mistaken by someone else? As these questions crossed my mind, I was reminded of the girl I asked out over Hinge, whom I ditched to chase over a shadow. I called on her number and wasn't even a slight bit surprised that she blocked me. Who wouldn't? If I was in a normal condition, even I would block the person who ran off in the middle of a date. Dating was never my idea in the first place. My best friend Joseph was the one who installed Hinge on my phone and set this date up for me. I did chat with the girl a few times and she seemed nice and all, but my mind was distracted during the entire date. After sending an apologetic text, I threw my phone to the side of the bed, and then myself. As I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't help but remember the times I spent with her, and how much I regret not being able to stop her from leaving. Donna is my little sister, and among 5 siblings, she was the youngest and only sister, so she was loved by all. Of course, I was the one who was the second youngest and 2 years older than her, so my bond with her was the strongest. The two of us went to the same school. If anyone ever bullied her, she would run to me in the middle of class, and I would always stand up for her. That didn't mean that I left teasing and irritating her to the side. No, the more we hung out, the more we got on each other's nerves. Being the only girl in the family except for Mom, Donna had the privileges and no one dared to raise their voice on her, except for me. The two of us fought like cat and mouse, and despite all the factors, she would still want to follow me around and play with me. I didn't mind it either, since I loved her just as much as everyone else. We all know how the families in USA work. Once the brothers start to turn 18, they move out one by one, leaving only the two of us with Mom and Dad. By the time Ethan, who was only 2 years older than me, moved, our oldest brother had proposed to her girlfriend for marriage. Even then, I didn't realize that my baby sister was starting to get quieter, and her behavior started to change. After Andrew's marriage, Logan also decided to start his family and moved with his fiancée. Then one day, Donna came to my room in the middle of the night to talk and asked if I would also move out of the house after turning 18. There was nothing I could say at the time since it was what I was, and my 18th birthday was 11 months away. To be honest, I didn't want to leave her all alone yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew very well that our parents wouldn't agree to me staying till her 18th birthday, so I didn't have a say in this. Besides, I'd already started to look for a place and was saving up money by working part-time. Judging my silence as a yes, she quietly got up and rushed out of my room. That was the first time I noticed my sister's changed behavior. Otherwise, she was always the stubborn type, and would often keep repeating her question until I gave her the answer she wanted to hear. Ever since that day, the talking between the two of us went to a bare minimum. The only time she would speak to me was when there was something necessary. I thought maybe she needed some time, looking at how all the drastic changes in her life were taking place, so I didn't think much of it and let her be. But her solitude went on way too long, and she ended up cutting me off completely, which started to concern me. We had fought before, and there were times when we went off to not talking to each other, but it never lasted more than 2 days, and at the end of the day, we would always end up talking among one another. A month before my birthday, she came to my room once again and asked if I had time to talk. "Sure, why don't you sit down first?" I said, clearing up my clothes off the bed. "I've asked Mom and Dad that I would be moving in with my boyfriend, and they have given me permission, so I was thinking I should tell you as well." I was confused at what I just heard. She wasn't even 16 yet. "What are you talking about, Donna? Why would Mom and Dad allow that?" As I asked her, she just shrugged her shoulders and looked me in the eyes. "You're not kidding, are you?" My voice was still filled with doubts, thinking she was pulling some sort of prank to stop me from moving out. "Why would I do that? You can ask our parents if you don't believe me." As she said that, my anger rose, and I ended up raising my voice. "Are you out of your mind? You want to live with a boy, and do you have any idea how dangerous it is?" Her expression changed, looking at me shout at her. It wasn't irritation, sadness, or anything, and it was something I couldn't tell at the moment. I rushed to Mom and Dad's room to ask if it was true that they had given her permission, and leaving me dumbfounded that they said yes, along with the lines that they had met the guy and he seemed rich and nice. Did they even love any of us? After arguing with them for almost an hour, I stormed outside the house without even looking at Donna. I didn't want to go back, so I stayed over at Joseph's place for the night. The next day when I got home, I noticed my sister wasn't there. For some reason, my heart started beating loudly, and the feeling of agitation started to take over my senses. I called Mom to ask if they were together, but she stated that she left her home this morning. Her voice sounded carefree as if she said she might be hanging out with her boyfriend, so I rejected the call. But for some reason, this situation seemed alarming to me. I rushed to her room only to find that her things weren't there anymore. Her clothes, shoes, makeup, and even books. Everything was gone. Was she planning on running away from the start? I tried calling her number, but she didn't pick up, and after several times, she turned her phone off. Having no idea who her boyfriend was, my perturbation only grew stronger by the minute. I again gave a call to Mom and asked about her boyfriend, but looking at how she didn't even remember his name, I was more than disturbed. Even Father had no idea about who he was and where he lived. I couldn't understand why in the world they permitted her to move in if they didn't even have basic information on the boy. Were they so eager for us to move out? I asked every possible person I knew she had contact with, and none of them had a single clue about her whereabouts or her boyfriend. After searching for her for days, I went to the police to report her missing, and as I was done with that, I went back to the house. And since my parents were so eager to see us move out, I did too. The news of her running away was shared with the other brothers as well, and everyone's trying just as hard as I am to look for her. But as all of them have a family to take care of, their time gets shared with them. That was the entire reason I was not ready to date. But Joseph keeps forcing me to move my life along with the search and keeps setting me up on dates on Hinge. The only reason I have this app is to see if my sister's profile pops up someday. I can find her. I hope she's alive and well. Whatever it is, she's still my 16-year-old little sister, and I don't want her to get hurt.
Suie, what kind of name is that? Zen, are you lying to us? Enzo's voice was filled with doubt. I wouldn't blame him, for I seem to have a knack for unintentionally driving away any girl who has ever been interested in me. Her parents were immigrants from North Korea, and if you still think I'm lying, you can go to the Tilted Kilt pub. She works there. Not blaming him doesn't mean I wouldn't get irritated. I was tired of my friends teasing and making fun of me. They had nicknamed me Girl Repellent, which was super annoying. He said okay, but his expression still revealed that he didn't believe me. They all will change their minds when they see me with the most drop-dead gorgeous beauty they ever had. He deliberately changed the topic as he sensed my indignation. Enzo was one of those few people who didn't poke fun at me as much as others, and he was also someone I considered my friend. But it's days like today when he gets on my nerves, and I want to punch the shit out of him for not believing what I said. No, like I would do it, but I imagine it sometimes. About Suie, I met her a few days ago when I was walking past a park and saw her sitting under a tree wearing a Tilted Kilt uniform, possibly sniffling on her own. Despite looking irresistibly sexy, no one seemed to pay attention to her. I couldn't help asking what was wrong, and as I did, she looked at me in surprise as if she had seen a ghost. She told me she was kicked out of the apartment she rented, and since she hadn't gotten her pay yet, she had no place to go. I might have seemed a pervert, but I asked if she wanted to stay at my place since I had a few rooms to spare. I expected her to shoo me away or reject my offer, but she didn't. She asked me to hold her hand and lead the way. I was surprised when a girl didn't run away from me for once, making me feel a little nervous. Despite wanting to tell Enzo, I respected her request to keep her away with me a secret and refrained. After my brief visit to my friend, I returned home, and since she wasn't there, I went to the living room and turned the TV on. I was focused on watching the streaming movie Insidious, the last key when I heard a whisper inside my ears giving me a jump scare. "Ah, see, you scared me. I thought you were a ghost," I said as I held my hand over my chest. "And what if I am?" she said with a smile as she wrapped her arms around me. "Then you would be the prettiest one out there." I gave her a small peck before it became a long, steamy kiss. "Is something the matter?" She seemed distracted. I cupped her cheeks and looked into her eyes. "It's my old landlord. He's still harassing me. Even when I lived there, he used to do indecent things to me. I wish he would die or someone would kill him so I could be at peace." Resentment and despondency were lucid on her face, and I couldn't bear to see her like this. For some reason, I felt I could do anything to see a heartfelt smile on that beautiful face. "Don't worry, I'm sure someone will." I embraced her in my arms and tried to assure her while patting her head. At the moment, I felt her anger and hatred infusing me as my own. That night, as she lay beside me, I couldn't sleep, and a few scenes where she was getting beaten to death flashed through my mind, overwhelming my senses with the itch to pay them tenfold to every injury they inflicted on her. I checked the time, and it was 2 a.m. Filled with anxiety, I spent the night twisting and turning in bed. Just when I started drifting to sleep, I was awoken by the doorbell. I turned to the side, and Suie wasn't there. Thinking she might have already left for work, I opened the door. It was Enzo. I knew he was here to play that game I'd bought recently. After welcoming him in, I returned to my room to freshen up when I heard him laugh behind me. "You play with plushies?" I followed his gaze to the bed where a red plushie was lying where Suie had slept last night. It's my girlfriend's. She might have left it here." I shrugged him off and dashed inside the bathroom. I didn't plan on going to work today, as I had something more meaningful in mind. The fleeting memory of hers I saw last night continued to play inside my mind. I handed the game to Enzo and asked him to play at his home as I had somewhere to be. Sometimes when you trust your eyes too much, you can't see the truth, and as a result, you end up doing irreversible damage. I experienced the same thing when I planned to destroy those who made the girl I love suffer. I don't know how, but I knew everything about them despite her never telling me any details. The owner was a vulgar drunkard pervert who often forced himself on her, and he had a son who rarely visited, but whenever he did, he would beat her and do the same thing his father did to her. The man owned a store, and his son had recently started working part-time with him after losing all his money to gambling. While putting up an act, I went there to do some shopping and moved to the area filled with oil containers. At first I thought of burning the place down with those monsters, but then I realized they had security cameras installed, so I waited for them to close the shop. The man headed home after closing it while his son received a call and headed off somewhere else. I wouldn't let this chance go to waste, so I followed him home. And as he was about to enter, I put my hand over his mouth and pushed him inside. I started thwacking him like I was possessed while he begged to know why I was doing this to him. Suie, she told me everything. Each word inflamed with aversion. I stared into his eyes, which made him tremble in fear. But it can't be. He started muttering those words while shaking like a leaf. I grabbed his throat and started choking him, not wanting to let him speak any further. But as his life was slipping out of his body, he released his final word, which made me retract my hands from his neck. He still died. But how? When I killed her, with my hands. My eyes landed on the red plushie that appeared out of the blue on the front table when I heard the door clicking. Dad, you... I turned around horrified and saw the man's son standing with a pale face. Before he could run off, I grabbed the empty beer bottle from the side and aimed for his head. I had gone too far, and there was no way I would let him reveal I was the culprit. Plenty of empty bottles were laying around, so I didn't need to find anything else. I grabbed another bottle and broke it on his face before stabbing his neck with its broken half. I looked at the plushie on the table and uttered before exiting the apartment. Enzo was right. I never had a girlfriend.
Stalked. After completing my college education, I'd been living with my parents for a little over a year. I remember feeling grateful for their kindness and patience during that time, as I struggled to find a job and a suitable place to live. It was not an easy process, but I kept myself motivated and optimistic and eventually landed a job that I enjoyed, in a cozy apartment that I could call my own. The job I got was to work from home since people were still scared that Corona could strike again, and they didn't want to risk it. The pay I received was quite reasonable, especially for a recent graduate like me, and it allowed me to purchase things I needed online on platforms like Amazon. Unfortunately, I couldn't control my urge to keep shopping, and my expenses started to increase gradually. Soon after, I found myself scrolling through the app for hours, and even though I didn't need anything, I ended up ordering stuff anyway. Over time, I realized I had developed an unhealthy shopping habit, and it was causing me more harm than good. That day, as I heard the doorbell ring, I quickly made my way to the front door. On opening the door, I came face to face with a middle-aged woman who was delivering my order. I couldn't help but notice how well she looked for her age, so I decided to compliment her to be polite and make her feel good about herself. She blushed and responded with a heartfelt, "You really think so? Thanks. My husband never complimented me like that." Her response made me feel a little uneasy, and I couldn't help but think that she might be getting neglected by her husband or that she was probably divorced. In an attempt to make her feel good, I said, "His loss." She smiled and thanked me again before I closed the door to my apartment. However, as I looked back, I wish I hadn't said that. Ever since that day, every time I placed an order for food or any other item, I noticed this same delivery woman showing up at my doorstep to deliver it. Initially, I didn't find it unusual, and in fact, I appreciated the consistency in her service. However, with each subsequent delivery, I began to notice that she would give me strange compliments that made me feel deeply uncomfortable. She'd comment on my physical appearance and make personal remarks that crossed the line of professionalism. Her behavior left me feeling uneasy and violated. As I continued to order from Amazon, her behavior became increasingly disturbing. I'd catch her staring at me through my windows, even when I had the blinds closed. With each other, the delivery timings only got later and later, and this made me feel uneasy. I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was doing it deliberately. It was as if she was keeping tabs on me, stalking me even. I tried to ignore it at first, but the feeling of frustration and fear only grew stronger. In the end, I made the difficult decision to stop ordering stuff, hoping that it would put an end to her stalking behavior. One night, I was startled awake by someone ringing my doorbell non-stop. I checked the time, and it was past midnight. Without much thought, I got up and went to check who it was, and as I opened the door, I found the delivery woman standing there with red eyes and smelling like alcohol. She grabbed my collar all of a sudden and asked in a very drunk voice why I stopped ordering stuff. I was terrified as to why she was doing this, but before I could say anything, she passed out. Now, I wasn't the kind of guy who would leave a drunk woman alone at my doorstep so predators could take their chances, no matter how much of a creep the woman was. But I didn't want to let her inside my house either, so I called the police and informed them about everything. Soon after, 2 officers arrived and escorted her. A few days went by, and that day I was out shopping at Walmart. When I came home, I was terrified to see that woman sitting on my couch waiting for me. She had a crazed look in her eyes as she looked at me entering. I asked what is she doing inside and how she got in, and she just looked at me weirdly and said, "I'm here for you. I want to make you the happiest man on earth." Trust me, being a man doesn't automatically mean that we would feel flattered or happy if a woman were to stalk us. On the contrary, it could be an incredibly frightening experience, as I was at the moment. I felt a sense of unease and vulnerability, knowing that if things went wrong, she could easily make false accusations against me. As a man, I also felt that I might not be believed if I tried to report what was happening to me. Feeling terrified and overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, I nervously stepped out of my apartment and quickly dialed my mom's phone number. As soon as she answered, I poured out my heart and explained what had happened in my life over the past few days. My mom's voice soon turned fierce with anger as she listened to my story, and she promised to come to my aid immediately. Within just a few minutes, my mom arrived at my doorstep, and before heading in, she suggested that I go to her house where I'd be safe. I don't know what my mom had said to that woman, but after that day, I never saw her again. Before we parted ways, my mom offered me a word of advice that I've never forgotten. She warned me never to compliment another woman unless it was her or my girlfriend.
Cut it out! Other people make noises as well, so why are you hanging your sword at my neck all the time? I got frustrated when Mrs. Hubert came to nag me for the 4th time since this morning, all because my dog Penny was barking inside my apartment. Oh, they'll be getting a piece of me too, but the sounds from your apartment are clearer, so it'll be wise for you to stop making noises. I hate it. She was not stopping anytime soon. Having you at my door every minute is not thrilling on my part either. But people live here, Mrs. Hubert. They can't just go on without making a sound. It's not like it's my fault these walls are paper thin. Besides, we all are trying to compromise our best. So why can't you do the same? I could feel the tiredness in my voice as I tried to explain it to her again. But looking at the reaction I was getting from her, all of this just went over her head. After working nonstop for over 10 hours writing a thesis, all I have done in the name of breaks was listen to this old hag's nagging for no particular reason. Penny is a pug, so you can already guess that she doesn't bark much, and even when she does, her voice comes out lighter than other dogs. But the issue with this apartment building is that it is poorly constructed. Waterproofing is to laugh at. Walls are super thin, and there are so many other issues that if I start counting them, the fingers would beg to stop. That's when, even when I walk into my apartment or turn the tap on, she can hear all of this, since her apartment is below mine. It's not like I don't face the same issue as her, or any other resident doesn't, but like it or not, we all have to live with it due to our circumstances. Even though I do work from home, my work requires a lot of mental and physical energy, and when the cranky old lady is involved, it gets drained more. The only leisure time I get is around 8 p.m., when the show America's Got Talent gets aired, and since watching it not only just boosts my self-esteem, but makes me feel happy as well, I love it. And that is also the time when Mrs. Hubert makes more noise than ever, screaming from below to keep it down. But since I don't want her to ruin the only positive time when I get to look through the hidden talents that might be hidden inside me somewhere, I ignore her completely. A few days passed, and this twisted routine continued, and it was finally the day when I had to go and submit my thesis personally. At first, I was scheduled to do it online, but my professor told me he wanted to take a look before it gets published, so I headed there. Discussing the piece with him and making a few minor adjustments before giving it for publication took the entire day, and by the time I got back, I was exhausted. But I was still looking forward to the new episode that was going to air tonight on the talent show. There was going to be a contestant who was going to perform some magic tricks, and looking at how I was a big fan of magic ever since I was a child, I couldn't wait for the clock to strike 8. "Oh, hey, Cora, where are you coming from?" It was my neighbor, Ellie. She lived on the same floor as me and was much nicer than others. "Just some work stuff. Where are you headed off to?" I asked. "To the grocery store. Want to come?" And before I could deny her invitation, she grabbed my hand and started walking to the exit. "Well, I guess I could buy some tofu while I am there," thinking while I accompanied her. I ended up buying more than just tofu, even more stuff than Ellie, as I realized upon reaching the store that I was short on many things. Well, I wasn't surprised by this outcome, since I rarely leave the apartment to do anything, and whenever I'm out of groceries, I just order them online. She helped me carry them to my apartment, and in return for her kindness, I asked her to stay for a cup of coffee, which she agreed to. "I don't see Penny anywhere. Did Naomi take her to her place?" she asked, looking around, and it made me realize she didn't come to greet me at the door either. She must be around here somewhere. It sometimes happens when she's sleeping or watching squirrels through the bedroom window, so I didn't think much of it. After Ellie left, I started looking for Penny around the house, and when I couldn't find her, I thought she might have gotten out somehow. I spent hours looking around the apartment building and went to search each floor, but she was nowhere to be found. She couldn't have gone off outside the building since she was scared of places with many people. So if she wasn't in the building, that meant someone took her. But who? I called my sister and asked if she dropped by to take her, but Naomi refused, saying she was at work all day. It was perturbing to the point where I started going door to door at each apartment asking if they had seen Penny or if she accidentally walked inside any of their apartments. But as I looked high and low for her without any success, disconcert grew along with a sense of trepidation that something had happened to her. I loved her as my child, and the thought that someone might have taken her was dreadful. As I returned to my apartment after spending hours looking for her, the only thing I did was hope that she returned on her own. if she was hiding somewhere. I didn't have the heart to do anything more, so I sat on the couch with my head between my knees. Tears started to fall, and I couldn't stop wailing. Surprisingly enough, Mrs. Hubert didn't scream or nag even once today. It was as if she wasn't even there, and that was when I remembered that it could have been her who did it. But she didn't have the keys to my house. I could not just go and accuse her of kidnapping my dog. Still, I had to do something, so thinking of asking her politely, I went to the floor below mine, only to find her apartment door locked from the outside. I returned in disappointment, since she was my last hope, and if she didn't have her, then I didn't know where to find her. As I was still trying to look in every corner of my house, hoping to find her, someone started banging on my door loudly, but instead of getting disturbed this time, I ran to open it thinking it could be Mrs. Hubert, who might have come to return Penny. But when I opened the door, there was no one outside. Instead, there was a carton box with a note on it. I picked it up and read, "I told you to keep it down." As I read the note, it made me very apprehensive about opening the box, but I still squat down and opened it with trembling hands. A loud, blood-chilled scream escaped my throat and echoed throughout the floor as I fell back horror-stricken upon seeing my Penny's body, with her head smashed so inhumanely. Residents from the apartment came out and saw me shaking in my shoes with horrified expressions. Ellie rushed to my side, but as she saw what was in front of me, she backed away, only to throw up from the sight. I didn't want my Penny's death to become a show, so I took her inside and started crying, bawling my eyes out. That night, I spent crying and wondering who might have done such a thing, and if it was the old lady below me, since she was the only one I could suspect who had a problem with me. But even if she did do it, no one would ever believe me. I managed to bury her body next morning and informed Naomi of her death, which made her devastated. She started crying. There was no way I could live in that place any longer, so I asked my sister if I could move to her place for a few days until I find a new apartment within budget. She wholeheartedly welcomed me, and within a week or so, I moved out of this wretched apartment. I don't want to think about those painful memories any longer, and since I don't want any other innocent animal to go through the same, I didn't bring any more pets, nor am I planning of doing so in the future. Ever since I was a little girl, I had received many praises for my voice. People would often call it angelic, blessed, and many other pleasant things whenever they hear me speak or sing. You know how mothers usually sing a lullaby to their children? But my case was different. I was the one who used to sing before we slept. This is not an exaggeration, since my mom had insomnia. The only thing that could make her fall asleep was my singing, whether I sing a nursery rhyme, poem, or song. She often said God gifted me to her to cure her sleeping problems, and I also felt happy singing for her. When I reached the age of 11, my mom passed away in a car crash, and Dad raised me alone after that. He was a good father who always put my needs before his own, and I wanted to do something nice for him once I grew up. I often saw him silently staring at Mom's picture alone in his room. Sometimes there were tears in his eyes, but I never once saw him letting it fall. Some people used to say that the only thing I have is the voice I was born with, and I have no talent except that, which made me feel a bit sad, since it was true. But it was not like I started hating my voice because of their opinion or something. My mom used to tell me that it was ethereal, and she made me love it. So how could I ever dislike my voice just because someone felt insecure about it? Even then, my school life didn't have much difficulty, despite being the girl who didn't talk much. Students and teachers were always nice to me, which made me feel at ease. Well, whether people acknowledge it or not, I did have the talent to copy a song to however it was sung by the original singer. I could copy the high notes, low notes, pitch, rhythm, everything just by listening to it once. That was the reason whenever there was a singing competition, show, or anything that included using voice, teachers would encourage me to do it. People started saying that I should go to the US talent show, America's Got Talent, and show off my otherworldly voice. While their compliments made me feel good, I never thought of actually entering a talent show because I always thought the people were just being generous with their praises. So I never took them seriously. After graduating from high school, I chose psychology in college since I always had an interest in that. And the more I indulged in the subject, the more I found myself drawn toward it. I never thought about what I would do after my master's in psychology, but I did start to learn magic tricks through it. Not that I was thinking of becoming a magician. Now that I'm thinking about it, a psychotherapist might be a good choice. Anyway, I never moved out of the house since it was clear from my dad's condition that he never moved on from Mom's death. He never dated any woman despite being so handsome, and leaving him alone in his misery was not something I could do, so I decided to take care of him. I joined a part-time job at a department store to bring some extra income home apart from Dad's earnings. It was a different case that I did not want him to work anymore, looking at his health falling gradually. But since I knew it would hurt his self-esteem, I never said anything. As his health started to decline more and more, my fear and anxiousness of losing him started to grow. So I decided to do something. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. That was when I remembered all those compliments about going to America's Got Talent. So I started participating in competitions and talent shows to get an idea of how these competitions work. I was pretty naive back then, so whatever others used to tell me, I would foolishly believe. And since I had no idea how to get into America's Got Talent, I asked around about it. That was when I met a man who told me that he had some connections there, which would help me go through auditions and other procedures smoothly. He also exchanged numbers with me, and since he seemed nice and sweet, I decided to trust his words. I didn't tell Dad about any of this yet, and wanted to surprise him after I get selected, so I started practicing secretly. Then, one day, I got a call from that man, let's call him Jared, telling me that I needed to meet him the next day for a pre-audition process or something, and the way he explained all the details about it convinced me that it must be a real thing. He came to pick me up the next day, and as I was entering his car, my heart was nervously racing, and I started to question if I was not ready yet. Nonetheless, I was still going to do it. He asked me to sit in the front seat beside him, and while lost in my thoughts, I followed his command like a robot. I don't know why I couldn't pick any red flags from him until he started driving, when it was all too obvious. The glances he was stealing from my body were the first thing I noticed, as it was making me feel uneasy. But even at that time, I was thinking it would be rude of him if I asked him to stop that. But when he stopped the car on an empty road, I flinched with perturbation. He then turned to me and gave me a look that resembled those hungry wolves I saw in wildlife documentaries. It was far worse than that. Maintaining eye contact, he leaned on me while I trembled with foreboding. The moment he extended his hand and gripped the hem of my dress, I rummaged my inner courage and pushed him away with all my might. Before he could react, I opened the car door and started running as fast as I could. I thought he would follow me, but luckily he didn't. But still, I was scared, so I ran inside the nearest store I could find. Not knowing what else to do, I called the only person I knew I was safe with, my dad. The moment he had call, I started crying without being able to speak a word, and the part-timer working there was smart enough to take the phone from my hand to ask him to pick me up. After explaining the address, she gave me my phone back and even offered me some tissue with a glass of water. I never told her what happened to me, nor did she ask. But she still somehow understood that whatever it was, I needed her help. Since there weren't many customers at the store to begin with, she continued consoling me till Dad got there. Before going with Dad, I thanked her for everything she did, since she was one of the kindest human beings I ever met. Looking at my trembling body and puffy eyes, he got worried and asked me about what happened. I started telling him everything as he continued driving home with a determination in my mind that I was never going to hide anything from him anymore.
Thank God it was just a dream. I thought I killed them. I was awakened by a terrible nightmare, and my breathing was haggard. You know those dreams when everything seems too realistic, only when it gets broken by some factor you realize that was just a dream and not reality. I keep having those the past week, and the worst part is, sometimes I get too invested in them that I feel like I'm doing all those bad things. How should I address them? Yes, they make me feel like I'm inside the PUBG world. I would name them PUBG dreams. Hi Samuel, up for a match tonight? Ready to kill some butt in the games? It was Ethan. He started game talk the moment he saw me. Wherever I go, there's always someone who's charged up and all enthusiastic about the games. There's always discussion about how many kills to achieve next. We all give ourselves a new target each day and also set up a competition among ourselves, and the moment I get home, everyone is calling me to come online. I'm all games too, but sometimes I want some space because it feels like these RPG games are taking over my mind. Guess that's why I'm having these weird dreams for the past few days. There are 4 of us who are more into PUBG than other online games. Even our rooms are themed accordingly. Each one of us owns the game's costume, including a helmet, camouflage bag, and medkits in our room. Mine is placed right inside the study table. We have a fake replica of AWM M416 and a few pistols decorated on the armory portion of our walls. There's a good thing about all this, and it's that even in my sleep, I'm subconsciously aware of my surroundings. So whenever I'm dreaming and I hear a sound, I feel like I get up, pick a pistol from my armory, and move around similarly as I do in the game. Anyway, my exams are just around the corner, and because of all the gaming with my friends, I'm not able to focus on my studies at all. At this rate, I feel like I'm going to fail, and if I do, trust me, my father is going to kill me. It's not like I don't want to study, but whenever I pick up my book, it's either Mason, Ethan, or Carlos. Someone is constantly giving a call and asking for a match. Even though I know they only do this to increase their ranking since I've never lost a single game and am an MVP player, I have a weird personality where I cannot say no to anyone. It doesn't matter what the situation's calling for. If anyone's asking me to do something, I would always say yes. You can call me people pleaser if you want, but that's just how I am. This is why even when the midterms are over our heads, I cannot stop playing the game. Sam, what are you doing? You know there are only 4 days remaining till the exam, right? I was in the middle of the game when my father sneaked up in my room and started scolding me. He wasn't supposed to come today, so what in the world is he doing here? I was just taking a break, Father. My voice broke as I made up a weak excuse. Huh? You're saying you were studying before this? He crossed his arm and asked while raising his eyebrow. Now, for those of you who don't know, my father does this whenever he's suspicious of me, or he knows I'm lying about the topic in discussion. Also, he's in the army, so most of the time he's away from home and doesn't come often. This is the main reason I get away with so many things despite him being so strict over everything. But I have no clue why he came today instead of 3 days later. For the days that are left, I'm calling over Pedro's sons to have study sessions with you. Understood? Yep, he has caught on to my lies. That is why he's calling over those two nuisances. Let me tell you a little something about Uncle Pedro's twins, Brandon and Blake. They're not only just any bookworms, they are like buzz killers. If anyone's in a fun or good mood, they always say things that ruin it. I hate those two, and my dear father knows it very well. His way of punishment is always bizarre, such as this one. The only reason for him summoning my sworn enemies are because I lied and haven't been studying, and as my punishment, he has summoned them. And their presence means I won't be able to get a single moment to have fun. Hell, I won't even be able to get a chance to breathe freely. I feel pressured wherever such well-mannered know-it-alls are around. Makes me feel self-conscious. Anyway, so the next day when I woke up, Father had already gone back to his post. And guess who dropped by in the afternoon? Brandon and Blake. They came in like they owned the house and went directly into my father's study. Now, if you don't want them to snitch on me to Father, I had to study as well. So I grabbed my book and followed them. As I was studying, all the while getting annoyed by two unwanted presences, I couldn't help but think about what others might be doing, and my mind drifted off to the game. Focusing on books was getting harder, and my migraines started to hit off, so I decided to take a break for a quick nap. It was around 5:45 p.m., and thinking of a 15-minute room, I headed to my room. The moment I closed my eyes, I drifted off to sleep, and within a few moments, I was having a dream. In that dream, this world where we lived was the map of PUBG, and the people surrounding us were players whom I had to kill. Since I couldn't play the game all day on PC, enjoying it in this dream wasn't all that bad. I moved around the house, and the only thing I could find was a pistol. For some reason, I knew the weapons in my room were replicas, but since it was a dream, they should work fine. Nonetheless, I grabbed whatever weapon my mind thought would work and headed forward to find enemy players. The only people I spotted were the twins. Even in my dream they looked annoying. Blowing their heads off was going to be fun. I was going to take headshots on them. I hid behind a door and aimed the pistol towards Blake's head, and then bang! He fell on the floor. And Brandon started to look around to see where the firing came from. So I hurried before he could take out his weapon and took a shot at him as well. He fell lifeless on the ground, but something felt weird. They didn't become crates as I was expecting. I rushed towards them and looked around. Is this not one of those dreams I keep having? The moment this thought crossed my mind, my face immediately started to turn pale. What did I do? Should I run? Should I call for help? But they will know I killed them. How should I explain this to Father? No, this can't be real. Every single time I have these, they always seem this real, but know all too well they aren't. Maybe because this is not the actual game, but inside my dream. That's why they haven't turned into crates yet. Maybe if I wait a bit longer, they will turn. Should I just go back to sleep? Yes, I should. I should go back to my room and sleep. And I know, just as always, I would wake up from this nightmare any minute now. With all these going on inside my mind, I strode back to my room without even caring to put the pistol back and laying on my bed. I dozed off as I closed my eyes, but instead of waking up on my own, someone else shook me awake. I looked over the man standing right in front of me, and it was Father. Phew, thank God it was a nightmare. As I thought that, I noticed my father's pale face as he stared at my hand. What is he looking at? I followed his gaze and found myself holding the pistol. What? No, this can't be. But that was just a nightmare. Father, I thought, it was... Before I could explain myself, he walked out of my room while locking it behind him. No, Father, listen to me. I swear I didn't do this on purpose. Father! I banged on the door while screaming in an attempt to explain myself, but he didn't give me a chance to explain. There was no other choice but to wait for what was to follow. My legs were feeling numb, and I fell as I started wailing. I was still wishing for all of this to turn out to be a nightmare, but unfortunately, it didn't. Father came back with a few people, possibly cops, and they took me inside a van that seemed like it was supposed to be for prisoners. I didn't intend to kill the twins, but still, they're not listening to what I had to say, and it was supposed to be a nightmare. Only if this was a PUBG game, I would have killed every single one of these people, stolen their vehicle by now, and made a run for the safety zone. For I am the all-time MVP player. My days would go by working at my home office and ordering takeout food for my meals, which I knew was rather unhealthy. But looking at my work as a designer, I had no free time on my hand for cooking a decent meal for myself. So as a result, I would always randomly choose between restaurants such as Domino's, KFC, Wendy's, and Popeyes. But I vividly remember it. There was no order placed by me that day since I was so busy with work, I didn't even have time to touch my damn phone. The designs I was working on were finally completed a day earlier, so I was thinking of taking a rest that day. But around 8 in the morning, I received a phone call from the head office that I need to make changes to all of them as they were appealing though. I was never the type to take criticism on work to heart. Rather, I would gladly work on whatever adjustments my designs needed and be happy to come up with something unique. After a brief discussion of what part of the designs needed adjustment, I got up from the bed to go and wash my morning face off. I took almost half an hour to freshen myself up before I headed downstairs to get a glass of juice for myself before heading to my workspace. Despite working overtime mostly, I had successfully avoided getting addicted to caffeine and was thinking of letting this continue in the future. It wasn't like I wasn't tempted to drink coffee, but as someone who had a diploma in dietitian, I knew what it could do to me once I started drinking it. Trust me, coffee is way more addictive than alcohol or a drug since people cannot quit it. The moment I fished my juice, I rushed to the workplace and started to work on the designs. Coming up with new ideas, even for a few minor adjustments, was rather hard. Thinking about changing what I had already put together needed a few complete sets of sketches. So I took out my sketchbook and started working on new ideas while making the old designs as my base. Once ideas started to flow up, I decided to put them into action. And the moment I finalized a new design, I decided to send them and get approval if the new ones would be perfect for the theme. They seemed impressed with the new ones and told me to change all the designs based on that, since the theme for all the designs was the same. Coming up with new designs was not an issue anymore as I took the base designs of others and combined them with the new ones, creating each of them unique, and all the while fitting perfectly with the designated theme. By the time I was done with all the sketches, it was already 3 p.m., and I had decided to eat once I was done with the final drafts, so I continued working. After 15 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I didn't want to get up and leave work in the middle, so I stayed still and ignored it. The bell rang again. It was weird since I didn't have any visitors at my place. Thinking there must be something urgent for my neighbor to disturb me, I finally got up and went ahead to open the door. Upon opening it, I noticed there was no one except for a box placed on the entry mat with a Popeyes chicken logo on it. I was sure I didn't order anything, but still, I picked it up and went inside. Looking at how much work I had left, I decided to eat it later, so I put the box inside the refrigerator and went back to work. I was still confused, thinking why would anyone send me food, or did I subconsciously order it while working, which was unlikely because I remember not touching my phone after this morning's call. About an hour later, when I was once again absorbed in work, I heard my phone's notification in a distance, but since my focus was entirely on the designs I was working on, my mind automatically disregarded paying any attention to that. But I could still tell that my phone was beeping now and then, which was also pretty usual because I don't get calls from work, as they know not to disturb me while at work, and I don't have any friends who could have sent me a message or anything. So I got to the conclusion that I might be getting spam messages, making my decision of not checking my device more firm. Anyway, I finished my work by 8 in the night, and sitting in a single spot for hours had made my body a bit sore and stiff. So I did a few stretches as I got right up after sending the final draft. As I was in the middle of loosening my joints, I received a phone call from the office informing me that the designs were immediately approved, and they gave me praise for doing a good job. I interpreted their words as meaning I could finally take a day off and rest for the next day. After the call was finished, I noticed a few deleted messages on WhatsApp. As I counted the messages, it was somewhere around 12. I find this message deleting feature over the app to be rather irritating. What was the point of it if the other party was informed of this action and ended up wondering what it could be that they had deleted? But I didn't fret over it much and decided to eat the Popeye's chicken someone sent me. And as I opened the box, the grease on the chicken wings made it unappetizing, so I threw it to the dogs in the alley and ordered from someplace else. The next morning, I woke up around 10, and for some reason, the thought of checking if the stray ate the chicken I threw or not crossed my mind. And as I looked outside, I saw a rather nerve-wracking scene where the chicken pieces seemed untouched by any passing animal or insect except for one half-eaten bite. Beside the piece was a dead kitten, making it clear that she had fell victim to the possibility of poisonous food. It made me feel guilty, so I decided to bury the kitten. But before that, I cleaned the chicken from there so another innocent animal doesn't fall victim to anyone else's viciousness. I couldn't understand why someone would want to kill me. Who would have possibly been offended by me enough to send me poisonous food? And what if I ate it? I would have been dead in my apartment by now with no one to discover my body for days. Even such a thought sends shivers down my spine. All of these questions were circling in my mind when I remembered those deleted emails. So I called on the unknown number, but it was turned off. I tried multiple times and it was still off. I didn't report the incident and nothing of that sort happened after that, but it taught me not to be so careless anymore. I avoid giving food by anyone since I still have no idea who it was that tried to kill me. And there is a possibility that it was not meant for me, as someone might have confused the address. But even then, precaution is better than cure. Or, I would like to say, death.
Gaming had always been the kind of thing that made me feel good while doing it. Whatever screams and arguings my girlfriend threw at me, I would always cool myself off by playing a few online games. But during one particular game, something happened that spooked me for a very long time ahead. It was around the time when PUBG had recently released and immediately went on trending. The hype for the Battle Royale game was so at its peak that those who weren't even gamers started to give it a try. I was also one of those who slowly became addicted to the game, and I would be online trying to get the maximum kills whenever I got the chance. That night, I was playing with a bunch of strangers, and we were hiding and killing off other players in the Georgia pool. I was genuinely enjoying the game with a total of 7 kills in the score for me. After a few minutes, the circle started to close, so we got a car and headed toward the shooting range. The 3 people beside with were also unknown to each other in real life, as we were talking while the game. One of them was extremely chatty, another one only spoke when necessary, and the third one had his mic mute. As I was busy in the game, I received a warning notification on my PC, but thinking it to be some random pop-up, I closed it without reading and continued playing the game. When we were about to win the game with only one team left to finish off, my teammate who had his mic turned off threw bombs at us, and within seconds we were in crates. Then immediately came the spectating mode, where you can watch your live team player play. The guy turned his mic on and said the most alarming thing in a deep, heavy voice. "I know where you live." I immediately turned the computer off without even knowing which one of us it was directed to, but I knew there was a possibility of a hacker knowing my information using my IP address. Being paranoid as I was, my eyes were wide open as I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking that the guy meant and whom he was referring to. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, but soon after, I was awakened by a loud bang on my front door. The first thing I did was check the time, and it was 6 a.m. I had slept for almost 3 hours. I got up with a throbbing pain in my head as the hammering on the door continued. With my fingertips, I put pressure on the aching temple while walking toward the door. And as I opened the door, I found Mr. Durkin standing there, along with a nasty stench that hit my nostrils. I covered my nose instantly and looked at him with a questionable expression.
But instead of explaining the source of the stench and the banging on the door, he went ahead and said, "The entire neighborhood is reeking with the smell of this animal. When are you going to clean it?" I looked over to where he was pointing, and I was shocked to see a dead raccoon lying dead on my porch. "Are you sure you didn't put it here?" I asked in a slow voice, because by the looks and smell of it, that thing had been dead for a few days, and I was sure there was no raccoon at my door last night. "Just clean the damn thing!" he shouted in anger, and I wasn't surprised at his grumpy nature either. That old man had been like this ever since I moved here. He stomped away to his house after demanding me such a thing, and I didn't like it either that such a rotten smell was coming from my house. It was clear that someone did this on purpose, whether it was out of spite or it was done by that guy who claimed to know my address. Despite being a guy, a few turns of events in the past had made me a bit of a clean freak, so I went inside since there was no other choice but for me to take care of this mess. I couldn't believe what I had to do first thing in the morning. After grabbing a garbage bag and a few cleaning supplies, I went outside and cleaned the dead animal. I wrapped the bag tightly and threw it in the can out front, knowing the truck would be here anytime soon to pick up the trash. When I was done, I went back inside to take a clean shower because it felt like the stench had clung to me, and I needed to remove it soon, for I have OCD and was unable to stand even a slight dirt on me. After the shower, I went to make myself breakfast, but I still could not shake this unnerving feeling off. It was too weird to be just a coincidence. First, a player in the game hacks my IP address to gain my information, and now this. There was nothing to ease my mind except for me to play games, and with the information last night, I was having second thoughts on whether I should do it or not. Right after finishing up my dinner and putting the dishes in the dishwasher, I went back to my room and turned on my computer. The first thing I did was to scan my computer for any virus, and then I contacted one of my friends who was skilled in hacking and stuff. I asked him to look into it and check if someone had tried to hack my PC using my IP address. After an hour or so, he dropped by my house to check after about 15 minutes of doing something over it. He gave me a thumbs up that there was nothing wrong with it. Marcus was a trustworthy guy, so if he said it was clear to go, then I believed him. He said to be careful while playing online. Mostly his advice was to not play anymore. I just gave him an agreement nod while saying goodbye. It's not like I stopped playing games after that. Instead, I took a precaution while playing and continued my online quest. Nothing of the sort happened after that, nor did I meet anyone who claimed to know where I live. That left me wondering if it was I to whom the man was referring to that night, or if it was someone else who had fallen prey to someone's nasty schemes. Regardless, if those events that occurred to me were a mere coincidence or a try to scare me off, still makes me fret over such possible manners. I just find myself lucky that I was safe from online crimes. Sometimes being a guy is not the safest thing as people think it is, and sometimes women are not always the victims in a case. I learned this the hard way when I was desperately trying to find a date for myself. I'm a 6'3" guy with a built-up body. I had always been the kind of person who was overly proud of his masculinity and used to think of women as feeble beings, someone who neither has as equal strength as us, nor can they do anything to protect themselves without our help. I used to think that a woman, if in danger, always needed a man's help. Doesn't matter if the person posing a threat is an animal or a man himself. Whenever I heard of a woman winning something, I would always be like, among women, right? They can never win against a man. And while my hypothesis might be right, I had no idea at the time the evil inside a human being, whether they be a man or a woman, can make them more dangerous than everyone else. It was one day when I met this girl, Sophie, on Hinge. If I were to judge her through her appearance, she was a cheerleader type, with her dressing style and her lean body. A perfect 10 high schooler. I was in my early 30s, and I believed in diversity, so whether the girl was older or younger than me, the only thing I cared about was the positions. We swapped numbers after having a few conversations and started texting each other. I waited patiently for 2 days before I asked if she wanted to go on a date with me, and she replied, "Why not? Your place or mine?" As I read her text, I thought of her as a rather straightforward girl. Then another text came from her side. I meant where I should meet you to head for the date. This made me form a smirk on my face because I understood pretty damn well what she meant when she said that. "Your place," I replied while maintaining my smirk, and she immediately texted her address to me. Asking for things on a first date had always been rather hard or impossible on my side, and here she was hinting at what I had wanted to do with her ever since I started talking. This was going to be the best first date ever. She invited me the next day around 8 at night, saying we would go to a restaurant to have dinner once I pick her up from her place. My place was slightly different from hers, and it did not involve leaving her house for the restaurant or anywhere. The next, I got to her place 10 minutes earlier than I was supposed to and gave her a call. She took her sweet time coming out, and as my eyes went on her, she looked like an entirely different person than the pictures. I mean, her features were the same, but the persona had completely changed from what I had been imagining. She had dip-dyed short hair compared to her pictures where it was long and black, sleeving tattoos, and by the looks of it, she was either in her late 20s or early 30s. The picture she had on Hinge might have been of her younger self. Well, as I had mentioned earlier, age fact does not matter to me, and she still seemed just as beautiful to me, so I decided to proceed with my plan. I asked if I could use the restroom real quick. She smiled at me without saying anything and then gave me a light nod. Now, this is where the real story began. As I entered her house, she turned on the light, which was not the white or yellow light one could find in a normal household. Instead, it was rather midnight blue. This wasn't something that crept me out, but what was lying on the top shelves of her living room? There were some very disturbing and weird things there. One of them looked almost like a possum mummy sealed inside a glass box. I followed her to the bathroom, and as I was inside, doubts started to form in my mind, questioning if what I was doing was worth it, because even her bathroom had hair-raising things inside. For some strange reason, something about Sophie didn't feel right. I don't know if it was because of her weird house, but I didn't want to stay here any longer. The moment I exited the bathroom, my eyes landed on the raccoon sitting in the middle of the way. As a reflex and out of fear, I immediately kicked it, causing it to fly in the distance. By its screeching sound, Sophie rushed to our direction, and instead of asking how I was doing, she went to check on the raccoon. She started talking to it as if it could respond to her question. When she asked me in a low tone and low voice, "Why did you kick Ronnie?" I'm sorry, I had no idea the raccoon was your pet. I thought it had broken into your house." Trust me, by the way she kept staring at me, my voice almost broke from consternation, and an unknown fear built up inside my chest. She then walked closer to me and looked over at me with her 5'5" or 5'6" height. And even with such a stupendous difference in our physique, I was still feeling scared by the unnerving vibe she was giving off. As she closed the distance between the two of us, I felt something stabbing in my lower stomach. And as I looked down, since when did she have a knife in her hand? That's what I thought. I raised my head to look into her emotionless, cold, dead eyes, which made my soul shudder with horror. She pulled the knife, and as she was to stab again, I pushed her with all my might and ran toward the door while holding the wound in my hand. The push wasn't that much effective since I saw her getting up and chasing after me from the corner of my eye. I still somehow managed to get out of there and immediately ran to my car. My consciousness wasn't getting to last much longer, so I drove to the nearest hospital. I watched her stand outside her house with the knife in her hand as I left her sight. That was not just the worst day, but it was the most terrifying date of my entire life. After reaching the hospital, I was still able to manage my senses as I informed them that a random street thug did this to me. Even at that moment, the thought of getting stabbed by a girl much shorter than me was rather embarrassing than a thug's stab. They did believe me and treated the wound urgently. I was lucky enough to escape her at the time. Otherwise, judging by her determination, that psycho girl was ready to kill me right then and there. Now, I understand that being a woman and a man means nothing if someone has evil inside their heart, because then they are capable of much more horrifying and monstrous things than anyone else in the world.
People in Las Vegas are crazy. Now, by crazy, I don't mean mental illness crazy. They're the kind of crazy who don't make sense. Well, for a girl who has spent most of her life stuck in the suburbs being homeschooled, nothing makes sense about this city. The only thing I was allowed to do in the name of socializing back then was attend the public library, where I made a few friends. I'm thinking this must be because I'm their foster child. In my opinion, this is the only argument that made sense for such a strict treatment. There is one more thing that I remember, which was back in elementary school when I was brutally beaten up by a guy for being weird. Doesn't matter what the reason was, but cutting me off from society was too harsh, even if it was for my safety. Thankfully, they started to let me be a little more outgoing after my 18th birthday, and that's what led me to come here to Vegas for a 5-day trip. About Las Vegas being crazy, trust me, I'm not exaggerating the crazy part. I hadn't eaten the entire day when I first got there. I was with 6 people, as there were too many of them. I'll name them as the story progresses. Anyway, 5 of them went to the hotel to check in and put our luggage in the room, while Kyla stayed with me at what seemed like a local restaurant with not many people, despite Vegas being crowded most of the time, especially at night. She hadn't eaten the entire day for the same reason as me. Since the 2 of us had gastric problems, we don't like to eat when we travel. I couldn't understand what the restaurant's theme was by looking at it, but it was an open restaurant with chairs and tables sitting outside. The midnight blue covers on them were giving off a unique look to it. I turned to Kyla, being unaffected by all this, unlike me, since she had already taken a seat and was going through the menu. I guess it must just be me, since I wasn't used to seeing new things yet, so I quietly took the seat next to her and patiently waited for her to order. After giving the order of 2 mussels along with 1 side of chips and salsa, she handed me the menu, saying I could order anything else if I wanted. I shook my head no and continued sitting there while looking around at the not-so-busy street. Since I was expecting the kind of crowd who would be rushing toward each other, this seemed a bit disappointing. I know what you're thinking. It's because we found the hotel far away from Las Vegas that people talked about. This place is much cheaper since not many people know about it. We'll be heading to the main street tomorrow morning after some rest. Don't look too disappointed, Kyla said, sensing my expression. Guess I was being obvious. By the way, I need to go to the restroom. I'll be back. She got up and asked for the direction from one of the employees and then headed there. It had been about 10 minutes since she had left. The boy on the counter signaled for me to pick up the order, so I headed there, and as I got back to the table, I noticed the rustling sound under the table. The table covers also looked as if they were moving a bit. I didn't pay much attention to it, but when the faint weird noises didn't stop, I crouched down to see what was going on. I peeked under the covered tables, only to find a grown-ass man, probably in his late 30s, lying on his stomach with his head up, giving the creepiest smile. It spooked me for a second, but then I regained my composure and asked, sir, what are you doing under there? He didn't say a word. Instead, he brought his index finger to his lips, making a shush sign. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? I heard Kyla's voice, so I immediately got up and backed away from our table. Let's sit over there. I grabbed our food and walked to the other empty table. Why? What's the issue with that one? She said annoyingly as I checked the table for any other possible men hiding, but luckily there wasn't. There's someone under there, I said in a low whispering sound while cupping my palms and placing them on each side of my mouth. But her expression told me that she wasn't able to listen to me, and as I was about to repeat what I had heard, a commotion behind me, I turned around to see a bald guy with a scorpion tattoo on the back of his neck, which went all the way back to the lower part of his head, standing at the counter pointing a gun at the employee. That was when the guy who was hiding under the table rushed out as well, taking out a gun and pointing to another employee, still showing his teeth, making that same creepy smile on his face. This looked like the case of armed robbery, but the expression on the table guy screamed insane from every angle. I didn't know if this was a normal thing in Vegas or not, since I had heard many stories from my friends about the place, so I looked toward the girl sitting with me, only to find her face going pale by the minute. The guy who I saw under the table took notice of me sitting at 2 tables distance from him, and with maintaining his disturbing smile, he gave me a wink, which made my blood curdle. The other guy forced the counter boy out and said something in a different language, which sounded like cuss words, before punching him in the gut. The next thing I saw was the most legitimately horrifying scene I had ever witnessed in my entire lifetime. As the boy curled up with unbearable pain, the table guy shot him in the chest, followed by another shot by the other guy in the head, which finished him off on the spot. Screams erupted through every direction, including my throat, and people started rushing out. The weird thing was that those guys didn't run off after publicly committing a murder and just sat down staring at the lifeless body of the boy, the creepy smile never leaving the table guy's lips as the police arrived on the scene. I had frozen still on the table. I was too petrified from all that to move. But as the police were taking those two guys, one of them gave me a brief wave that only I took notice of. An eldritch feeling took over my body, and a few unwanted drops of tears started to fall from my eyes. I was so abstracted by whatever just transpired to notice two pairs of hands gripping my shoulders and taking me away from the crime scene. Sarah, are you okay?" I gave a nonplussed look to Eric and Luca, who seemed to have gotten here after hearing the news from Kyla. As I was coming back to my senses, I saw Kevin and Bailey by her side trying to console her. Bailey and Luca took us to the hotel room, while Kevin and Eric disappeared somewhere, only to be back with takeout in their hands. My appetite had died down after witnessing what I just had. By the looks of it, my fellow witness friends were feeling the same. The rest of the days of our trip went normal, and despite the sudden petrifying turn of events on the first day, I didn't find any more men hiding under the table or giving me creepy winks, except for the boys who were trying to make a pass on me in the club. Other crazy things that I found were half-naked street performers, some with unique makeup on their faces. I know it might sound weird coming from me after witnessing something so terrible which should have ruined the fun, but I kinda enjoyed the trip other than being jumpy every time I looked at a bald man with a tattoo. And I know for a fact that I'm going to remember this one trip for the rest of my life.
I don't get the trend-obsessed people. I never did. What's so good about copying what's famous or what everyone else is doing that you start acting like a maniac? Even today, when people are more obsessed over trends than ever, I still don't have an answer to it. It was back in 2019 when I was working as a cook at Popeye's Chicken, and they released a new item on their menu, which was a chicken sandwich. For the first few days, it wasn't that popular since other brands were offering the same item on their menu. But something happened, and the popularity went off the chart. I got to the point where my hands would get tired from making back-to-back orders, and most of the days they started to sell out entirely for the day. As the popularity and sales started to break the charts, the customers started to get impatient, and it all started with using foul language with each other. Slowly, I started to get annoyed with all that shit that started happening inside the restaurant, that sometimes I wanted to just walk out of there and tell them that they were welcome to cook the sandwich on their own. But looking at my financial situation, I never got the courage to do that. Anyway, to sum it up, it wasn't just me whose days were getting pretty shitty. There was a bunch of employees who would get yelled at by customers. The endless lines won't stop until we announce that we were out of the sandwiches for the day. Sometimes during the late hours, right before the restaurant's closing time, people would get into arguments over the spot in the line, and the situation would escalate to threats, exchange, and verbal abuse. It would almost end up in a fist fight, which most often staff and others present would have to come forward to handle. The chaos over the sandwiches only rose by the day, and the customers would go to any length to gain that trending sandwich. That day was the same as others. The only difference was that since other outlets were getting completely sold out as the item was limited, people from other places were piling up to the ones who still had, and unfortunately, our outlet was one of them. I was in the kitchen working and listening to all the non-civil noises coming from outside, which usually I was still not used to, when I heard some people's voices getting raised as if a fight had broken out. It wasn't something uncommon at that point since people would make a fuss to get the sandwich before everyone else, so we thought it was the same as usual. I was told to continue cooking, and a few employees outside went ahead to handle the situation. The only thing I was hoping at the time was for our place to sell out of the sandwiches too, so these dreadful days for us could come to an end. As the commotion continued and other employees tried to stop the fight, I was in the kitchen minding my own business, when all of a sudden I heard a loud thud that followed the numerous gasping, giving me the impression that something harrowing had taken place. I'm not a very brave person when it comes to a mob or several men getting out of control, so cowardly enough, I didn't dare to take even the slightest peek at what was going outside. But other employees working with me did rush outside to see what was going on, and a couple of minutes later, when a few of them returned, their faces were completely pale. "Did someone call 911? One of my coworkers, Amy, asked the other one, Bran, in a hushed voice. "Yes, they did. Ambulance and police both are on their way. I just hope Simon's okay, because other than Charlie, his condition seems worse." His voice had genuine concern in it. I figured it was something related to the fight and guess our coworkers became the victim of it. "What are you guys talking about? What happened?" I couldn't contain my curiosity, so I asked. The fight that was going on apparently was got away from among the customers to the employees who went to stop it. You should go and see their condition. Oh, by the way, the manager said we need to close for the day. Both of them turned to me before Bran said this. I hesitantly walked to the counter, only to see the condition of the tables and chairs, which were smashed, and a few people were holding forcefully 3 men down, while other employees were tending to Simon and Charlie. Charlie was sitting on a chair as his arms were bleeding, and he had a black eye which seemed like was the result of multiple punches as his lips were also covered in blood. On the other hand, Simon was unconscious on the floor, bleeding from his head, and his arms and legs seemed punctured as well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a little faint at heart, so witnessing such a scene didn't go good for me. My stomach started to feel weird, and I was getting nauseous, so I ran to the bathroom and threw my insides out. I don't know why, but I started sobbing right after, because if I had been the one who decided to go and handle the situation, I might have been among these two. And even though I didn't, those two didn't deserve such horrendous things happening to them. I liked those two. They always helped me out when things started to get a little tough with work and vice versa. After I was done throwing up, I got up with trembling legs and walked out of the bathroom. The ambulance and police sirens were heard by now, and along with other people's arrests, my colleagues were taken by ambulance. I took a peek to see that people were starting to go their ways with disappointment on their face, some of them even cursing those who started the fight, since it came between them getting the sandwiches as well. I even heard someone saying they waited in line for hours for nothing, and it only wasted their time. There's no word I can think of such people who have no regard for others' lives. Here's someone who is trying to do their job to earn some money, got assaulted in broad daylight in front of an entire crowd, and they had the nerve to say that it hindered them. That day, I decided to resign from the place, and it was not only me who thought of this. Well, it was only right to resign when your life is getting threatened at your workplace, and the management is only thinking of the profits they are getting by such a chaotic situation. So that's what some of us did the very next day. Thankfully, Simon's condition got stable, and Charlie also received the proper treatment needed for his injury. While Simon also submitted his resignation after a few days because it was pretty obvious that he was in no condition to work, Charlie decided he would continue. We all supported his decision, and we're still in touch to this very day. I've decided to use my degree in finance and landed a stable job for myself. Who am I kidding? I've been applying for this position since I started working at Popeye's Chicken, but glad news that I finally got it. And the pay's pretty good too.
Restroom. I worked for Amazon about 2 years ago. It was a night shift job, and to be honest, I enjoyed my work as it wasn't too stressful and I had friendly coworkers. The work environment was pleasant and I felt content with my job. But one day, I experienced something that shook me to my core. My office building was quite old, and there was a restroom on the 4th floor at the end of the hallway that no one ever used. In fact, it seemed like no one ever went to the 4th floor at all. People in the office gossiped a rumor about strange happenings on the 4th floor, and some of them even believed that it was haunted by the ghost of an old employee who had passed away years ago. They said that whoever entered the restroom would be haunted for the rest of their lives. At first, I didn't pay much attention to these rumors, but as time went on, I started to feel uneasy whenever I had to pass by that part of the building. The cleaning staff wouldn't clean the restroom, and no one would ever say anything about it. Even the management didn't seem to care, which I always found weird. It was as if they were intentionally ignoring that part of the building. During our workday, we were given a total of 1 hour for all our breaks. This included time for eating, using the restroom, stretching our legs, and anything else we needed to do. Unfortunately, if we went over the allotted time, we risked getting in trouble with management. That day, when I needed to use the restroom, I found that there were 2 employees already waiting in line. And I knew that if I waited, I would be cutting into my break time, so I decided to go to the 4th floor's restroom since it was the only one unoccupied. This way, I could make the most of my break without sacrificing any of my much-needed downtime. After reaching the floor, I quietly walked to the restroom, and as I slowly pushed the door open, I felt a sudden and intense chill that ran down my spine. There was someone eerie about this place, which made me wonder if the rumor was true. The air felt thick and heavy, and I could barely breathe. The unpleasant smell of stale air made me feel nauseous. I took a deep breath and walked inside, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that was creeping up on me. As I scanned the area, my eyes landed on the ventilation window. I could feel a faint breeze emanating from it, and wondered if the chill in the air was a result of the cool wind entering from there. Despite my initial assumption, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had taken hold of me. I reluctantly walked towards one of the toilet stalls, but my mind was preoccupied with the unsettling sensation that continued to persist. The restroom was in terrible state. The floors were littered with paper towels, and the corners were filled with cobwebs. The toilets looked like they hadn't been cleaned in ages, and the sinks were clogged with hair and soap scum. The door of one of the stalls were broken, and it was hanging off its hinges, adding to the overall sense of disrepair. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me, and I wanted to leave as quickly as possible. But I had no choice but to use the restroom and leave. I walked over to one of the stalls and carefully took out the seat cover, making sure not to tear it. As I was about to sit down on the toilet seat, I heard a loud flushing sound coming from the stall next to mine. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in place, wondering who could have entered the restroom without me, noticing since I knew for a fact that nobody had come in after me. I listened intently, but the sound stopped abruptly. I found it quite strange, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After a few seconds of hesitation, I brushed it off and continued to sit down. However, right after that, I heard an eerie sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was a faint whisper coming from the stall next to mine. At first, I couldn't make out what was being said, but as I strained to listen, the whispers grew louder and more urgent. The voice sounded like it was coming from someone in distress, and it was telling me to leave the restroom immediately. My heart began to race as a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I suddenly realized that I was not alone in the bathroom and that someone or something was watching me. As I tried to gather my thoughts, the whispers turned into a menacing growl that seemed to be coming from all around me. I frantically stood up and pulled up my pants without doing anything. My instincts told me to get out of there as fast as possible, so I bolted out of the restroom, my mind racing with all kinds of possibilities and my heart pounding with fear. I hurriedly made my way to the nearest restroom on my floor. Thankfully, it was empty and I quickly locked myself in, trying to calm my trembling hands and racing thoughts. As I relieved myself, I couldn't help but wonder what had transpired in that stall next to mine. The whole experience had been so terrifying that I didn't even care that my precious 1-hour break was wasted and cut short because of that. The entire day, I was terrified, spaced out, and couldn't stop thinking about what happened. Following that incident, I worked at that company for over a year, but the memory of that incident lingered in my mind, making me feel uneasy and paranoid. Despite my curiosity, I never dared to set foot on the 4th floor again, always preferring to use the restrooms on other floors, even if it meant walking a greater distance.
It happened 3 years ago when I got a call from my friend, Harry, one Sunday evening. He asked if I wanted to go with him to the new Tilted Kilt pub in the area. I had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I arrived around 8 and found him waiting with a few other guys. Everyone meet Simon. He is the guy I've been telling you about. Simon, these are my friends Carl, Fred, and Dan. I shook my hand with each of them as he introduced us. I had recently moved to this town about 2 months ago and was giving back-to-back interviews and still waiting for positive responses. Harry was someone whom I met through an online game and have been in contact with for more than a year now. Judging by our conversations, he seemed pretty decent, so it was no surprise that we got along well. And after moving here, we started hanging out with each other quite often. He always had some exciting place in mind and helped me interact with new people to make more friends. It wasn't like we were best friends, but I still enjoyed his fun-loving company. Anyway, as we were having fun with each other, I noticed him staring at a hot brunette server. I wouldn't blame him for that, since the girls working there were a feast for the eyes, and it was not just him who had their eyes on one of those girls. After spending 2 hours at that place, we returned to our apartments. The next day when I called Harry, he did not answer, so maybe he still had a hangover from last night. But when I received the same response every time I tried calling him, I thought he might be avoiding me for some reason. It was a different case, though, that I had yet to learn what it was. Anyway, I still hadn't heard from him for a few days. Then on Thursday evening, I went to the same pub I went to last time with him, but it was strange that I never once saw the brunette server in the 2 hours I spent there. I thought maybe she had an evening shift or something, so I decided to return at the same time we were here last, but I didn't find her even then. I asked the other servers about her and discovered she had skipped work since Monday. It was the same day when Harry stopped answering my call. I couldn't rest easy until my curiosity gets resolved, and since I knew a few places Harry could have been, I decided to check all of them out and ask if anyone might have seen him. But it turned out he hadn't visited any of the places he frequented in the past few days. Nor did his friends know about his whereabouts, since they were getting the response I did whenever they tried calling him. I remembered he had a fiancé, Brian, who used to spend a few days at his apartment occasionally, so I got her number from one of his friends and contacted her. "Why are you asking me about that jerk? He can die for all I care." The moment I told her about Harry, she yelled through the phone. Guess he must have done something to piss her off. So I asked, "Did he do something?" "Oh, so you're one of those friends who have no idea what he truly is?" I could tell the level of her anger by the way she was sounding. "Pardon?" I asked in confusion. That douchebag had been constantly cheating on me for a while now. He does nothing but fool around with girls, and I am done with him. So it would be better if you never call me again to talk about that dirt. I'm sure that must be some misunderstanding. All he did while with me was sing your praises. Ah, my goodness. Are you talking about some innocent love he had for me? Don't be a fool. He admitted being unfaithful to me several times, and each time I forgave him. He must be busy screwing some woman, so I advise you to stop worrying about him and mind your business. I couldn't believe my ears. What in the world was she talking about? I had never known this side of Harry she told me about, but then again, I only knew him for a year and a half, and how he looked at that server was not something a man with someone in his heart would do. After the call got disconnected, I decided to heed her advice and only focus on doing what I originally intended when I moved here. So, after applying for a few jobs online, I went to play some video games. The next day, I got a call about my selection from one of the companies where I had previously given an interview and that I had to join from Monday. I decided to visit the pub that Saturday evening and have some drinks. And as I was doing that, I overheard someone talking about that brunette. She was found dead at her apartment after being missing for over a week. They spoke of her mysterious death and that her parents had filed a missing person report on her before her body was found. She was found wearing the same clothes that night, but according to the autopsy report, she died 2 days ago. I took the last sip of my ordered drink and went to the apartment. I was going to sleep my tiredness off for a fresh start at my new work. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the questions that crossed my mind. Was this just a simple coincidence, or was there something more to it? Was it true that Harry was a womanizer, and if it was, could it be that the server's disappearance and death had anything to do with him? There were multiple different assumptions and theories people were coming up with that were entirely different from mine. As Brian suggested, whatever the case was, it was none of my business. I was abducted at the age of 8 by a sadist man named Luca, and I've been living as his sex and torture slave since then. The day I was abducted, I was playing in the park when he came to me and started to talk with me nicely. He told me his daughter, who could not walk, was in his car and asked me if I would like to play with her. He asked me to follow him, and I thought he was a good person, so I followed him. Big mistake, right? Yes, I know that now, but I was 8 back then. I know at that age we all have been immature, but always acted like we were mature enough to differentiate between good and bad. I followed him while talking to him as soon as we reached the car. He put a handkerchief over my nose, and I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a huge room, and that man was sitting beside me and staring. I started crying and asking him to let me go home, but he slapped me hard and told me to keep my mouth shut or he would kill me. I was terrified, so I followed his command like a scared puppy. He looked at me lustfully while smiling, like a monster, which terrified me even more. After that, he came closer and tore my clothes. I did not know what was happening to me, but I was so scared that he was going to kill me, so I kept quiet and sobbed silently. But then he started doing something to me which was painful as hell. I started to bleed, and I thought I was going to die. I kept screaming, but the monster did not stop, and I passed out eventually. When I woke up, I was alone in the room, and my entire body was hurting like crazy. I tried to get up, but I felt dizzy and fell. I was feeling a sharp pain in the lower half of my body, and I was unable to move. I thought I was going to die back then when I thought he was trying to kill me, but I guessed that I may have survived somehow. After that, I started to think about how to run from there. But as I was unable to move my body, I kept lying on the bed while thinking. All I could think was to hide somewhere. But then the man came back. He looked at me, and without saying anything, pulled out a small iron rod. He beat my legs over and over again until they started to bleed. And then when he was done, he said, "I know you must be thinking of running away, but now you won't be able to. From this, you won't be able to move for a few days." After that, he did the same thing as before to hurt me and continued doing it day after day. It's been years, and I am stuck in this hellhole, unable to run from him. He makes me do chores, beats me up with different tools each time, and rapes me continuously. A new reality television show has been aired these days, Power Slap, which he watches every night. He makes me sit with him and watch them together. The contestants slap each other continuously until one of them wins. Sometimes they are even knocked out by this. As I just told you, he makes me sit with him to watch, Which, what I meant by that is that the psycho not only watches Power Slap, but performs it on me while watching the show until I am knocked out each time. And if I try to block him in the process, he starts to kick me and tell me not to do that. As a result, I am continuously in pain throughout the day, and I started to have several concussions, but he doesn't care. Today was the 7th day in a row that he called me to watch that sick show Power Slap with him. I was trembling the entire time sitting there while he kept hitting me. With the last slap, I was knocked out unconscious, and then I woke up while he was standing over me with a packet in his hands, staring at my belly annoyingly. He handed me the thing and left after telling me what to do. It was a pregnancy test. I was supposed to pee on it, and if 2 pink lines were to show in there, I was to immediately tell him about it. I figured 2 pink lines mean pregnancy. I was hoping for it to be negative while taking it because I did not want my child to suffer the same fate as me. But my prayers went into vain when another pink line got visible after the one. I started to panic. If I were to tell him, he would take the child away from me and go through these things with the child as well. I was called by him and figured that it was time for Power Slap. I had decided what to do and how to save my child from suffering the same fate as me. So I quietly went there and I was walking and I saw his back. He was sitting on the sofa watching the show. I moved there without making a noise and stood behind him. As he was about to turn, I slapped him in the back of the neck with a knife that I brought from the kitchen. His eyes popped out in vain, and he died while looking straight into my eyes. I never knew it was this easy to get rid of him. If I knew, I would have done this earlier, but I guess I wasn't brave enough. Thank God that this pregnancy changed me in a good way. Enough to remove all the problems away from my future child's life. I turned my head toward the television. The Power Slap's 8th episode was streaming. I sat next to his dead body, turned his face toward the television, and said, "You should see the final episode to find out who won."
I work at the Starbucks. That is, I get to hear every day some name that I cannot possibly pronounce, and I will get every bit of mind of an annoyed customer. But the job doesn't necessarily pay well enough to be listening to people bicker and care that their expensive coffee was not something they wished it would be. But I did this job because it would help me pay for a lot of things while I was in college. And even though I didn't really had any lifestyle like them party boys in my class, I just wanted to be able to work at my spare time instead of just partying, because parties sure looked like a hell of a time wasted over drinks and stuff. I was an overachiever as a worker, and everything was meant to be perfect for me, even if it wasn't something that I could control. And that was the reason that I was making a good name in the company. But it is surprising how one tiny incident, a little incident that you think was not relevant, could change the course of future for worse. You try to work out all the things and realize that things were simple at the first place, and it is the people that are way too complicated. The thing is, these incidents happen so subtly that you never think that is something that will happen to you because you are so careful about everything. So it was a Monday morning, the roughest of all. Nobody likes a Monday, but they obsessively love their Monday coffee to be perfect. It's like the sacred day starter for a lot of people. The most important of all, like the whole day depends upon it. In the Starbucks that I manage, people are very passionate about it. I remember the day started usually, and there were people coming in and going out, and the day looked like it would be the same as any other day. But then, the small things started and escalated into a big incident. It started as little as me calling our barista. I called Sam, and he was in the middle of an order when I called him. I took the cup from him and spelled the rest of the spelling, and then made the cup for one Roderick, And then, as I gave the cup, the guy pointed out the spelling mistake, which I ignored at first because there were many customers already waiting to be served. But the man was persistent and too sassy for a morning, and he came up to me and said, "The spelling on my cup is wrong." And I looked at him and apologized and said, "I'm sorry, sir, it won't happen again." And then I moved on to the next order. And the guy replied, "This is why you're working here, because you don't know how to spell a name." And I said sarcastically, "I'm sorry." I spelled sorry wrong because I was not in the mood to tolerate him. But then the man looked at me and said, "You think you are very smart. You are going to pay for this." And I had no idea what he meant. I apologized again and said, "I'm sorry, sir." And then he said, "It's Roderick, not Roderick." And I replied, "I get it, sir. I realize it now, and I will make sure that this does not happen again." But the man seemed like he was here for nothing but trouble, and then started calling out the whole staff names in front of everyone present in the cafe. And then I decided to not tolerate him anymore and told him, "Sir, please get out and do not disturb any more customers." And the man flipped and tried charging me with some of the guys in cafe held him back against asking him to chill. I knew what was about to happen, so I took off my apron and I came back from behind the counter and held the man and said, "Get the hell out of here, man. Enough is enough." It was all intense, and I was grabbing him by his arm, taking him away outside the cafe. He took something out of his bag, dropped the coffee, and then shot me in the stomach from point-blank range, and kept shooting until the bullets went out. I never thought that something so little like spelling would cause this much mess. The last thing I remember, it's the Monday morning, and I'm lying down outside the Starbucks I work in, and I am bleeding.
Every year, we go hunting up in Millerville, Alabama, where my in-laws have a cabin. I come from New Hampshire and spend most of my time outdoors in the woods growing up, and I don't scare easily. However, I don't know what it is, but those early morning and after dark walks to and from the hunting stance in the Alabama woods scare the daylights out of me. There's something different about the woods there that I can't put my finger on. I just kind of always felt uneasy. So this one area that we hunt has an old abandoned house on it. My brother-in-law told me that it was the old Alexander place. He said when he was very little, he remembered going there with his dad. I guess they all got to go drinking, and old man Alexander pulled out a gun and just shot himself through his foot for no reason other than he was absolutely crazy, I guess. My father and brother-in-law booked it out of there. And so, my first trip hunting up there, he showed me the hole in the floor. I guess about 15 or so years later, old man Alexander dies. His kids didn't want anything to do with him, so he died out there all alone. In fact, they didn't find his body for a couple of months because no one ever even checked in on him. Apparently, he got dressed in a Sunday best, laid down in his bed, and pulled the trigger. 1 year after that, I got out of my stand from my morning hunt, and I decided to make a pit stop over at the old Alexander place. The trail to my stand runs along a creek bottom and is about 3 miles from the hardtop, about 2 miles from the hardtop on the same trail as the intersection that leads to Alexander's place. It goes for a good mile and is completely overgrown with just enough room to go through with my Honda. Started to get creepy down there when the house finally comes into view. Now, I know it's been about 5 or 6 years since I've been there, but the place was decaying fast. I forgot how spooky it was down there. The place is in the bottom of a hollow, all overgrown, extremely dark. The house was covered in kudzu, and a big tree had fallen and caved in a large portion of the roof. I shut off my four-wheeler, and right away I'm freaked out by the complete and total lack of noise. No birds, no chipmunks, nothing. Not a sound. I get to the front door and open it up. The floor is covered in leaves and pine needles from the hole in the roof. It's dark, dank, and musty, and smells a little of rotting flesh. I reason to myself that there's probably a dead animal under the house, or something, and continue about. This house is pretty small, with one room for the kitchen and living room, and a single bedroom and bathroom off to one side. Now, at this point, my mind is telling me to just get out of there. But my sense of exploration wouldn't listen to reason. I started poking around. And I'm amazed because everything seemed to be just as old Alexander had left it. Granted, he'd been gone many years and things were rotting away. But it looked like it hadn't been touched. I started to wonder about what he did to make his family just straight up abandon him to the point that they didn't even come around to scavenge for things to sell, just left him to decompose, and then found him and abandoned the house afterwards. Now, you have to understand something about me. I've been an antique collector for years, and in particular, I collect old pictures and period frames. As I look around me, I see beautiful old family pictures set in very ornate original wooden frames. 3 of them are in the bedroom and in perfect condition. The others are in the living room, where the tree crashed through the roof. Those portraits were ruined, but the frames were still intact for the most part. So for the next hour, I started digging through the paperwork, reading letters, looking at closets, and such like that. I'm totally engrossed and almost unaware of everything around me. I end up looking in his bedroom, looking under the bed, and I pull out an old box of letters that old man Alexander wrote to his wife during the war. I sit down on the old mattress and start reading for about half an hour, I guess. I'm halfway through this one letter, and bang, the loud echo of a gun goes off. And it sounded like it was right in the room with me. I could even feel the concussion. It was so close. Now, if anyone has ever heard the effects of a gunshot in the house, then they know that there's a big difference between in the house and right outside the house. And this was definitely in the house. And it felt like it was in the bedroom that I was in. I pretty much froze for a couple of seconds, and actually slightly peed myself. At first, I didn't know if it was my brother-in-law messing with me, or some crazy mountain man shooting wildly. My rifle was in my car outside. So if that second part was the case, I was screwed. I took a decisive course of action and ran out of there. I jumped in my Honda and white-knuckled that sucker all the way back to the cabin. I got there and told him the whole story. Of course, they immediately wanted to go back there and check it out. So we all drove back there and had a good look around. But there was nothing to be seen anywhere, and went back inside with my brother-in-law as we were standing in the bedroom. He said it was probably the ghost of old man Alexander, either replaying his fate or warning me to get out. I ended up taking all the pictures with me. I refinished 5 of them and put old family pictures of my own in them and hung them on the walls of our farmhouse. I didn't destroy any of the original Alexander portraits out of respect and stored them in my den. The last portrait is of old Alexander himself in an ornate and convex glass frame, and it hangs intact in my foyer. It may sound kind of creepy to you, but it felt right to me. I think he may approve as well. I haven't been back there since that day, and I never will. But every time I get out of my stand after dark and ride my four-wheeler past the Alexander intersection, I put the high beams on and pin it all the way back to the cabin.
So for the longest time in my teenage years, I earned a few bucks a week by doing babysitting work. It always made me giggle at how there are so many urban legends based around babysitting. The serial killer that stalks the unwitting teen, the call coming from inside the house. Pretty much every Halloween movie in some manner that seems to present babysitting as the vocation of those with a death wish, when in reality, the only thing likely to kill you is the boredom. Sure, you get a bratty kid and makes an evening a little more challenging, but you get a good one. And you're basically sat on the couch for hours on end watching tedious cable TV shows and counting the minutes until the parents get home. Saying that I did babysitting for one family that ended in a frankly terrifying experience that ended up in me never, ever sitting for them ever again. It only happened once, but sometimes once is enough. So I arrived at this big old house a few blocks away from my parents' house at around 6:31 Friday evening. The parents of the kid seemed incredibly charming, and the kid is one of the more adorable little tykes that I've had the good fortune of minding. We go over a brief list of rules, what the kid is and isn't allowed to eat, how much I'll be paid, and how long I'll be sitting for, and that sort of thing. Then the parents head out to whatever fancy party that they had been planning on attending. All goes well for a little while. The kid wouldn't eat their carrots, but when I pretended that they were delicious by taking little bites myself, they soon broke into a smile and pretty much demolished the little bowl of hummus that we were sharing. With a kid fed, I gave her a bath, tucked her in the bed, and that's that. It was honestly one of the easiest jobs I'd had, right up until the sun started to go down. So once the kid's asleep, I head downstairs to order a pizza on the parents' dollar. Like I said, they were perfectly nice and polite when we first met, and it's not often that job comes with free food. Pizza arrives pretty quickly, and I even tipped the delivery guy a few dollars just to say thank you for being so fast. He's literally counting out the change in dollar bills when his head snaps to the side, like he's looking into the bushes at the side of the house. I asked him if everything's okay, peering out from the door to see what he's looking at. But there's nothing, just dark bushes. He said something along the lines of, say, "Guess I'm just tired. Mine's playing tricks on me." He laughs awkwardly, then walks back to his car while thanking me again for the tip. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, was probably just a cat or something, right? So again, back inside they eat, have a full-on carb overload, and ended up just lying there on the couch watching TLC. There were these big bay windows in the family's TV room, and I had drawn the curtains earlier to block out the glare on the TV only, and drawn them all the way. And there was a slight crack in the curtains that allowed me to see into the dark front yard. At one point, my eyes were drawn to this little crack, and I could swear I saw a dark shape where street lights were previously visible. I sit up, focusing my eyes on the shape and wondering if it were my mind playing tricks on me this time. When it moved, wasn't going nuts. I had been looking at someone or something who was in turn looking at me through the big old windows. That's about when I started to freak out. I had been super chilled all evening, but now I was getting that distinctly paranoid feeling like someone was watching me. Someone who didn't exactly have the best of intentions. I ran around the house, making sure all the doors and windows are locked as a precaution, all before keeping their cordless phone as close as possible so that if it came to it, I could call the cops. I was sure I had seen someone, but the chances of them just vacating the area at the sight of flashing lights then returning later
could be a huge possibility, and a terrifying one at that. So I decided to shoot my shot only when it would be absolutely necessary. Appearing to waste police time would not be doing me any favors. I suppose I'm just trying to explain why I didn't call the cops right away. I've had friends of mine that said that. They have just called 911 right then and there, but I wasn't 100% sure of anything right then. I'd seen a shape. Michael Myers pointing a knife at me. Life isn't black and white most of the time, I was thinking anyway. I've secured all the windows and doors, shoved the cordless phone into my hoodie's front pouch, and have even positioned the Little League bat near the couch, so that I was sort of armed. So by that point, I started to feel relatively safe again. If there was some creeper lurking outside looking to prey on a teenage babysitter, they would get one heck of a rude awakening when I waved my bat at them and screamed that the cops are on the way. So I lie back on the couch, but naturally find myself unable to relax. I open the curtains back up so I can see if anyone is hanging around in the front yard, keeping my eyes on the windows every so often in between watching whatever social train wreck is on TLC. Nothing happens for a while, and I start to think it was all just in my head or something. Right about the time I get up to wander in the kitchen to grab a drink of water. As I'm in there, I get that intense feeling that I'm being watched. I turn to see that same dark shape in the kitchen window. Only this time, I rush into action. I hammer 911 in the phone, telling the dispatcher I need the cops to my address ASAP, that there's a home invasion in progress. I honestly don't know if it was the adrenaline or I was just sick of pervs thinking they can get away with stuff like that, but I just sort of charged after, screaming out that the cops were on their way. I ran into the TV room, grabbing the Little League bat, and just ran for the back door, which led out of the kitchen and into the backyard. What happened next is frankly astounding. As I ran it, the guy, baseball bat in hand, ready to bash his brains out right there in the yard. I recognized him instantly. It was a face I'd seen before, not long ago at all. It was the kid's dad. So long story short, the dad of the kid I had been babysitting had for whatever reason decided that you need to see what kind of babysitter I was to, apparently he drove his wife to whatever party they were headed to, turned back saying he'd forgotten something, then decided to watch me over the course of about an hour or two to see if I was worth the cash that they were spending. Obviously, since no crime was actually committed, there was no one to charge. The dad offered me a sincere apology. He even offered me double the cash just to finish the night out, but I refused. No amount of money could have persuaded me to stay, and needless to say, I was very selective with who I babysat after that.
Do you remember your childhood? Do you remember the games you indulged in as a child, playing hide and seek and playing tag? Some of the sweetest memories of your childhood, probably. But mine are a bit different. I was born in a household of 8 siblings. It was the late 50s. I was the youngest. The oldest brother was 16 when I was born, and I remember the hazy image of my father, a tall guy, wearing a yellow check shirt almost every day, and always returned home drunk. Did not bother to ask us anything. I was too small to remember it all. But this is what my mother recalled about him whenever I asked. She told me that he never picked me up or cradled me or talked to me. I have no regrets of it. This is the story my elder brother told me. And this story was the reason we all split and were sent to other families. It all happened at the beginning of the 60s. My sister Lucille, my brother Daniel, my other brother Lawrence, and my elder brother John, they all were out in the backyard. I think they were playing tag or something like that. It was then that our neighbor knocked and he gave the 2 tickets to my mother. They were the tickets to see Elvis perform. Now, if you know who Elvis is, then you must know that what big of a deal it would be to see Elvis perform. Now, there were only 2 tickets, but there were 4 of them competing for the tickets. Everybody wanted to go, but no one was ready to back out and give the ticket to their brother or sister. My parents were conservatives, so there was no chance that they would let them easily just have the tickets for Elvis' show. So they begged and begged to let them take it. When my father returned, my mother told him about the tickets, and my father was pretty adamant about tearing up the tickets. And he said, "Well, this is devil's music. Unless y'all are the devil in disguise or worshiper of it, I would not let you go." My brother John spoke up and said that this is not devil's music, and raising a voice to your parents was surely the easiest way to get smacked. But my father had something completely else in his mind. He took the tickets and raised it over a glass jar and said, "Well, all right, if you want the tickets, you have to earn it." And that is when we put on a wager. It was simple. All 4 of the contenders will be participating in a series of games, the children games, and the last 2 standing will get the tickets. At first, the kids were relieved, and they just presumed it would be an easy bet since all they had to do was probably run or hide or do all the stuff kids do. So the first game was tag. Now, tag is an easy enough game, but our sinister parents had something completely else in mind, and they made our siblings go barefoot. And then they were made to compete in tag. At first, they didn't really understand the seriousness of it all, but it hit them. As they were told to play tag in the hot gravel and sun, and as they did, blisters popped and burned their feet. As everybody except my eldest brother gave up and went back inside. But that wasn't enough, and they set on the witch hunt. Now, it was the turn for hide and seek, they said. But as they were hiding, my parents would pinch the sibling hiding or inflict some sort of pain to get them to give up their location. But my siblings were tougher than the usual and would do everything to not give up that. Eventually, by the time game ended, Lawrence gave up and closed himself in the room, crying endlessly. But the 3 were still not ready to give up on Elvis. About 3 more excruciating games later, my brother decided that it was enough, and in a ruse of the game, he went on to call the police on my parents. And my siblings to this day recall that it was the right decision to make. None of them got to see Elvis live, but they were very much happy that they all get to be away from the abusive parental relationship. Now I watch this Squid Game, and I am remembered of the time this all happened. Later on in life, we did make our peace with Mom. She was very sorry for everything that had happened. But my dad was just another level of scary and crazy.
It all started when I moved to this new apartment. Suddenly, I started to receive some wrong delivery orders, but it turned out it was specifically sent for me. My name is Gracie Hart. I started modeling ever since I was 12 years old. Even when I was not very famous, people would often praise me for my beauty and my personality. And after graduating from college, I decided to completely focus on my modeling career. So I moved to this apartment right in downtown LA. Due to my hectic schedule, I had to order everything on delivery from the nearest store. No one was allowed to step inside the gate of apartment building, so the guard used to take my deliveries, and later he would drop it outside my apartment door. But one day, when I was having my periods, I ordered few packs of sanitary pads, and the next day, when I opened the door, I found chocolates in a carry bag lying outside my apartment. I thought the guard may have mistakenly delivered it to the wrong apartment, so I gave it back to him. But after a few days, I got another wrong delivery, and this time I had ordered modeling magazines, but instead the magazines I received were lewd ones. I got furious. I thought the delivery guy had pulled a joke on me, so I called him and started shouting at him, but he swore that he delivered the right ones.
Then I thought it must be guard because whenever I passed by him, he kept staring at me with weird glaze. So I went to guard and threw magazines at his face and told him it's not funny. But to my surprise, he told me that he never delivered anything, and the magazines along with deliveries of other apartments are still with him. Day by day, the incidents kept increasing. Whatever I ordered, I would always receive another delivery. I realized it must be the work of some stalker. The agency I was modeling for was near my apartment, and one day after finishing shoots, I found a package outside my dressing room. I opened the package and there was a set of lingerie inside. I freaked out and threw it away. Ever since that day, I started suspecting everyone around me. The neighbors, the guard, the delivery guy, and even my fans. There was a big shoot for a major project in which I had to dye my hair blonde. The shoot gave a boost to my popularity, and one day I received a black hair wig delivered outside my apartment along with a note. It said, "Black suits you best." I panicked and ran inside my apartment. I picked up my phone from the side table to dial 911, but then I remembered there was a clause in my contract regarding the involvement of a law, which says I need my company's consent before getting involved with laws. So I called my manager and told him about my situation and asked him to report it, but he denied, saying that it must be fans sending her gifts and it happens with every other celebrity. My manager told me to calm down and not make any issues because it will harm the company's reputation. So I decided to solve this on my own and cleared my head, took out my diary and a pen. I started to write down all the details, starting from the first incident to the last one, and the names of people I suspected. And I began to live my life like nothing had happened and I'm perfectly fine. But deep down, I was scared, alert, and I started to notice everything that seemed even remotely suspicious. Now, everyone I meet and walk past automatically came in my list of suspects, but I was not losing my mind. In fact, it was clearer to me now. I wrote down every suspicious activity around me. I asked the guards to show me the CCTV footage of the camera that is installed outside the apartment. He said the cameras are not working near my apartment and he will get it fixed by tomorrow. But after that, whenever I asked him, he made some sort of excuse and never let me see the footage. And that was the reason he became the main suspect in my list. I was still ordering foods and groceries through delivery and kept getting the weird packages outside my apartment door. Delivery guy was also one of my suspects, but since he was not allowed inside the gate, I could not think of any other reason except being the only one who delivers my stuff to the guard. It was my day off from work and I slept till noon. I decided to meditate, but after going through all these incidents, I couldn't calm my mind. So I decided to head to the gym that is in the basement of our apartment building. I spent the entire evening working out, and when I went back to the apartment, I found the door was unlocked. I decided to sneakily check who was it and has broken in my apartment. I opened the door without making a sound and tiptoed inside the apartment. Then I grabbed a knife from the fruit basket that was in the hall and looked around. That was when I saw a shadow in my bedroom, so I hid and tried to see the face of the stalker, but I couldn't see his face. I accidentally dropped my phone. He noticed me and rushed towards the gate. I tried to stop him, but he pushed me and managed to escape. I was fed up with this, so I decided to tell the police without even consulting the agency. I had collected all the evidences, my diary which contained the list of people I suspected, and the packages I received. I went straight to the police to file a report. After reporting these incidents, the police started their investigation, and after a few days, they found out who was behind all this. It was my manager. He fed money to the guards so that he can sneakily come and go to my apartment on his will. He confessed that he was one of my fans ever since I started modeling, and that was the reason he took the job of my manager at the agency. But since he never harmed me in any way, he only received a restriction order from the court. After that, my manager was fired from the company. I continued doing my modeling job, but I have decided to put faith in the law for future.
I'm not sure how to start. I suppose I should explain how I got here. It's not a thing I ever saw myself doing. I'm not a highly trained super soldier drawn to combat or a tough guy in any way. Until then, I'd only fired a gun a few times, taking pot shots at cans and the like. My interests focused mainly on comics and video games like most guys my age. In high school, I was in the chess club and still play a lot online. When I began college, I caught the coding bug, and that is what I focused on. I graduated with a degree and got a job with a small game developer. The job's been fun, and my coworkers are really cool and smart people. A lot smarter than me, in truth. Now, up until 2020, I had lived on my own for a few years. Unfortunately, that year was a perfect storm of misfortune for my family and the world at large. In addition to the pandemic, my mother made the difficult decision to divorce my stepfather. She had finally grown tired of enough of his verbal and physical abuse to kick him out. She was now responsible for providing for herself and my 12-year-old brother on one income. In spite of the odds, she was making it. Then the lockdowns began and she lost her job. This was a disaster. As soon as I found out, I moved out of my place and in with them. I quickly sold what I could and put the rest of my belongings in storage. There was no way I was going to let my family get turned out onto the streets, and certainly not while a deadly plague was ravaging the planet. The lockdowns were a mixed bag for us. My job was unaffected for the most part. All work switched off-site. The extra money I saved was put into food and other bills. My mother, who had always been very interested in vintage clothing, began reselling them on Etsy and eBay. At least on the financial front, we were eking out an existence. The good always comes with the bad, and my stepfather was nothing but bad. I had encouraged my mother to file a restraining order against him as a just-in-case measure after kicking him out, but instead, he still will be allowed to see his son. I considered other options, but it didn't seem fair cutting my little brother off from his dad. So as long as he played nice, I would mind my own business and avoid him when he came around. Fortunately, the lockdowns came to an end and we were allowed to restart our lives. I began working out of the office again and my brother returned to school. Mom quickly found a part-time job tending bar downtown. It was not an ideal situation, but a start at the least. My stepfather had to screw it up, though. He discovered where Mom was working and began frequenting her workplace. Mom had more than enough experience dealing with his crap and took his provocations on the chin. As usual, he got too drunk and pushed things too far. The night he threw a full glass of beer in my mom's face, the bouncers threw him out in his butt. I wish I could say that he learned his lesson, but bullies are often slow on the uptake. I couldn't deal with the humiliation, so he waited outside of our apartment, continuing to drink all the while. He sprang from the bushes and beat my mom mercilessly until she was able to escape into the safety of the apartment. I just happened to be away that night working on a last-minute deadline. Had I been there to witness it, what came later may have happened a lot sooner than it did. I arrived late the next afternoon, so exhausted that I could barely see, but the second I saw my mom's face, I exploded. I'd had enough. If the cops didn't do their jobs, I would do it for them. I think Mom could see how serious I was, and it scared her. I believe she came up with her plan not to stop the abuse, but to prevent me from ruining my life because of it. I was in the process of calling the cops when she asked me to hear her out. I was reluctant, but did so. No matter what she said, I still had every intent of making that call. She reminded me that the police had been involved many times before, but whether because of her reluctance to testify or just plain systemic disinterest, he had gotten off with little more than a slap on the wrist. Rather than call authorities, she proposed that we move somewhere that he was less likely to bother us. The lockdowns had put an end to any real reason for us to stay. Her original employer, along with many other employers in the area, had been destroyed. The school district, which had never been very good, was now in a shamble, and there was nothing keeping us there. I thought about it, and now that I'd calmed down somewhat, agreed that it sounded good. I may have had the most to lose, but I figured that I could probably work remotely. If not, I was sure that I'd be able to find a job using my skills wherever we ended up. And so the preparations began. That evening, we packed everything up that we could into our cars, and while we did so, I noticed Mom putting her dad's old Smith & Wesson revolver in her purse. I gave her a questioning look, but she quickly closed the purse and continued with the packing, and I kept my feelings to myself. The following morning, we rose up early and hit the road. We hadn't informed anyone that we were leaving, not even the apartment manager. Anyone who needed to know could be informed after we arrived at our new home, and even they wouldn't be informed of where. We convoyed for most of the day, only stopping for a quick lunch. About 6 p.m., we decided to grab a room for the night. I made an order for some pizzas. We'd been done eating about a half an hour when Mom got a text from my stepfather. I watched Mom turn dead pale as she read it. She just stared at the screen with her mouth gaping open. I grabbed the phone from her and read the message out loud. "Did you actually think I'd let you run away with my son that easy?" My brother and I stared at one another in astonishment. We both jumped up and ran to the window. I yanked the curtain back hard and scanned the parking lot for him. It was the worst thing that I could have done. He saw me first and began running toward the room. I yanked the curtains closed, but it was already too late. We couldn't do anything but stare at each other in dread as we waited for him to arrive. The silence in the room was terrifying. Outside, the sound of running grew closer by the second. A nauseating churning stirred in my guts, and I would liken it to waiting for a bomb to land and blow you to bits. I fought off the overpowering desire to vomit. Gradually, the clomping of his boots became a deafened pounding until nothing. For a brief moment, we started to believe that we had been somehow saved. Mom crept toward the door and carefully peeked through the peephole and just as quickly jumped back from it. Suddenly, the door exploded open and off its hinges. My brother and I turned and ran, but it was too late for my mom. She had become trapped under the door, putting her well in reach of my stepfather. He effortlessly snatched her up by her shirt and began punching her in the face as hard as possible. Each hit slung Mom's body back like a rag doll. My brother stood nearby helplessly begging his father to stop. I too could only watch as he pounded the life from her. There was little I could do. He was so much larger than me, massive and strongly built by years of hard manual labor, and I was left with only one option. The one that I had often threatened in anger but never imagined I'd ever have to choose. Yet I had little choice. He clearly intended to kill her, and if I was going to do something, it must be done immediately. Once I decided, the act was almost mechanical. I marched over to Mom's purse and pulled the pistol from it. I felt like that I was in a dream. It would be as simple as shooting a few cans. I pulled the trigger in 3 quick motions. The gun's sound deafened me and a ringing drowned out my ears. My stepfather stumbled back a moment and then glared at me with the most amazed and shocked face. It's the craziest thing. I'm still completely bewildered when I look back at it. I think he honestly believed that he was going to be able to murder my mom and take my brother with him and get away with it. It's insane, but I truly believe he thought that. I was about to pull the trigger a few more times, but he stumbled around and collapsed just outside the threshold of the door. I carefully stepped around my brother, who was in a heap on the floor, sobbing. I nudged my stepdad's body with my foot and didn't get a reaction. I looked over to my mom, who was unconscious on the floor. Her face was so bad, and I was sure that she was dead. I stuck the pistol in my front pocket and ran back around to where my phone was charging. I unplugged it and called 911. Just to be safe, I placed the pistol back in Mom's purse to make sure the cops didn't shoot me by accident. And while I waited, I checked Mom for a pulse and was happy to find that she was still alive. Help soon arrived and rushed her off to a hospital. Considering the circumstances, I had to stay behind with the police. I told them what had happened and the history we had with the subject, and they repeated the same questions over and over, I guess to see if I changed my story. And they must have been satisfied because they let me leave for the hospital a few hours later. I was instructed not to leave the city until I was formally cleared, which was fine with me. Our reason for running had been dealt with after all. They did take the gun as evidence, of course, and this bothered me a little because it had been my grandfather's service weapon when he was a sheriff, and I assumed that we'd never get it back. In the end, if this was to be the price for security and peace, it was well worth paying. When I arrived at the hospital, Mom was in surgery. The doctor's preliminary diagnosis was grim. Her face and skull had been fractured along with her brain almost certainly being enlarged due to swelling. There was also some concern that she may lose sight in one of her eyes. Despite the bad news, I was relieved that she had survived the attack, and the rest was in God's hands now. I joined my brother in the waiting room. He had to have been in shock. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster. Most adults live an entire life not having experienced as much as he had in such a short time. I sat and watched him for a couple of minutes. He stared at the TV keenly as if his life depended on it, and I broke the silence with an apology. I wasn't sorry for what I'd done, but I still felt bad for having to do it in his presence. He turned to me and thought deeply for a long moment before speaking. "It's okay. He was an a-hole and he got what he had coming to him. I loved him, but he was a monster. Don't feel bad. Mom's alive because of you." I was shocked by his reply, to be honest. He was a very quiet kid, and I never heard him voice those type of feelings before, and I was at a loss for words, so I gave him a big hug and let it go at that. Mom came out of surgery a few hours later, and we were soon allowed to see her. I tried to prepare myself mentally for what I may see, but I was shocked nonetheless. Her head was almost twice its size and wrapped completely, but for a few narrow tubes exiting it. I maintained my composure, but my brother was a different story. He was a blubbering mess, and I don't blame him. It was not a sight anyone his age should have to see, especially when it was his own mother. The next week was a long period of watching and waiting. The hospital was cool enough to let us crash in the room. I had also gotten us a new motel room so we could clean up or sleep in a real bed occasionally. Gradually, Mom's condition would improve, and she even managed to keep vision in her damaged eye. Nearly a month later, she was finally released. It was a day I had feared may never come, and I was very emotional when it arrived. Meanwhile, as Mom recuperated, the investigation continued. A few days before her release, I had found us all a small house to rent in town. It was beginning to look, at least for the time being, that this was to be our new home. It was a happy relief when the call finally came. After an exhaustive investigation, authorities had deemed my shooting to be justifiable, and I was a free man in the eyes of the law. The call came just 15 days ago, and I'm still somewhat shaken. I'm afraid something's going to happen to ruin our new life. Mom is improving by leaps and bounds every day. I've been able to keep my job working remotely, and my brother's continually proving to be an amazingly resilient individual. There is a small cloud looming off in the distance. Our lawyer has indicated that my stepfather's family has made threats of filing a civil lawsuit against me. He seems to think it's all talk, and I can't imagine them coming up with the resources needed to mount such a long and pointless undertaking. They are all a bunch of aimless poor alcoholics and addicts that can't even be bothered to hold down a job, and I remain optimistic considering my adversaries. I can't think of any more to include. The situation appears to be stable, and I think the biggest of our troubles has passed. Our new home is a warm and inviting place full of kind people. I wish every place was this nice. Mom has every intention of going back to work soon, and my brother has already started at his new school. It seems that after all the years my family has suffered, we may finally have come out the other side of the tunnel. The future should be bright from here on. My only regret is that a boy had to lose his father forever to get there, and that I had to be the one who caused it. A few months back, I decided I was pretty much over the breakup I'd had during the summer with my long-term girlfriend. It took me months to be able to get over it, as I was really heartbroken, but at some point you just sort of have to get back on the horse, don't you? So I downloaded that dating app Hinge and started swiping through profiles. It's definitely the best dating app I've come across, as it lets you actually message girls directly instead of just sort of hoping that they're going to see you and match with you. So it definitely gave me a better chance at getting to talk to the kind of girls I'm into, and one of these was a Persian girl named Suie. Suie was honestly one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever laid eyes on. She had this big mess of wild dark hair that was dip-dyed blonde towards the ends, really high cheekbones, perfectly sculptured eyebrows, and some of the deepest, darkest, most alluring brown eyes I'd ever seen. She was simply stunning, and because she'd grown up in Tehran, the capital of Iran, I had something of an edge. You see, I speak a little bit of Farsi, the language they speak there, and I figured that might impress her if I told her as much, which it did, and boom. Only an hour or so later, I sent her my opener and we were chatting. She was an extremely busy person, and I was flattered when she said that she would make time to see me. So, we arranged to meet for coffee over the weekend. She showed up to our date in her gym gear and apologized for being so underdressed, but could only make it after a scheduled workout with her personal trainer. But I didn't care at all. She looked absolutely smoking hot in her yoga pants. And we were having coffee, just kind of chatting about our lives, our interests, all that first date kind of stuff, when I look out of the big glass windows to see this dude leaning up against his car. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me at first, but after a minute or two I realized that he was just straight up staring at us. At one point, Suie noticed me looking over her shoulder and asked what I'm looking at, and I make a comment about the bloke outside who seemed to be proper eyeballing us. She then turns around, looking over her shoulder, then spins back with this terrified look on her face before saying something like, we have to leave, now. I'm all like, why? Do you know that fella? And she denies knowing him, but I'm not a dope. I knew what the score was, like straight away. Either it was a controlling family member or something, or it was a psycho ex-boyfriend. I figured all he'd do was follow us to try and be intimidating or something, but I never imagined he'd actually lay hands on me, and the way that he did it absolutely scared the soil out of me. You see, where I live is built up along this big mile-wide river, and the coffee shop me and Suie had chosen to meet at was right on the docks. So we're walking along the city's promenade when the guy cornered me, grabbed me by the throat, and started pushing me backwards so my back was leaning over the rails. I tried to get him off, but this bloke was an absolute unit, and as much as I tried, there was no getting him off of me. And the thing about the river where I live is that it's got a really, really strong current. Like if you fall off of a boat or over the side of the prom, you can be in serious trouble as the current will suck you under the water, drown you, and then just drag you out into the Irish Sea. So the whole time he's threatening me, telling me to leave Suie alone, all this big macho masculine stuff. Suie is smacking him around the head, telling him to get off me, and all the while I'm thinking, if I go over the edge here, I'm a dead man. And I don't think he had any idea of it either. Like it didn't sound like he was from our city, as we have a very particular accent, which he just didn't have. So he was probably thinking he could lash me in the water and embarrass me a wee bit, and I'd just be fine, but I'm telling you now, I wouldn't have been, and he'd have been done for manslaughter. But thank God, he didn't throw me over the railings, he just sort of backed off and headed back the way that he'd come after he'd blown off a little bit of steam. I mean, the girl was gorgeous. I don't blame him for being a bit sore after a breakup or jealous of another lad, but Jesus Christ, if he'd been angrier, if he'd have lost his cool, really lost control, I legit wouldn't be here typing this. I'd be floating in the Irish Sea somewhere, maybe washing up as a rotten corpse on the beach in County Cork, all because of some idiot getting a bit jealous. A few months back, I went on a date with a guy who seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't put my finger on where I've seen him before. I assume I might have met him on a night out. It was a last-minute thing, and I told him how I wasn't looking for anything, but it would be nice to hang out. That was a mistake. When I first met him, he seemed like an alright guy, but things quickly turned when we got to a restaurant. He didn't order, but I did, and he started saying about loving my curves and my body. I laughed it off, but I thought he was being a bit too forward. He could have put it nicely or kept that to himself. While having my food, he began telling me about how I was different from other girls because they don't give nice guys like him a chance. Red flags immediately going off, so I came up with a story that I could only be out for a little bit because my parents wanted me to dog sit. He bought it, but then proceeded to stare at my breasts and saying how he wished that he could see me without clothes on, even saying I should send him a picture. I told him I don't do that, and he was making me uncomfortable. He stopped, but then told me how he brought me a gift. He pulled out of his bag a bouquet of roses, which I guess I did think was sweet, and a bag of Tesco prawns. That confused me, and I burst out laughing. I asked why he got them, and he said he knew I liked tempura and prawns. But the thing is, I never once told him I did, so alarm bells were going off again. My head told me to run, but I didn't want to be rude, so I stayed until the time I said I had to go. So I had less than an hour left. Okay, I can do that. He kept talking, but started to scare me because he started guessing aspects of my life. The school I went to, what I was like as a kid, and what I am currently doing. He got every part right. It scared me because I had not told him any of this and haven't posted anything online about it. So I backed away and asked how he knew all of that information. Turned out his mother was one of my teachers in school, and he asked her everything she knew about me and looked online for anything about me currently. I don't know when he asked her, but at this point I wanted to get out of there. And thank God for my mom. Not long after, I got a text from my mom asking how things were. He didn't see the text, but saw it was my mom, and I just said, "Oh God, my mom and dad got the times wrong for the picture, so I have to go home now for my dog. I'm so sorry." The guy just accepted that and then started to walk me home. I said about only going halfway because I'm not comfortable with people knowing where I stay, but he then started insisting. He then dropped the bombshell that he knew that I stayed on X such and such road, but didn't know which house was mine. I told him that is really weird and that it creeped me out that he knew that. He claimed I told him, but I never tell people that. So I started to walk to the main road for my own safety, but he grabbed my hand and said he knew a shortcut. I told him I wasn't comfortable again, and he told me it was fine and basically dragged me to a quiet road. I was getting really scared when he stopped and shoved his tongue down my throat. I shoved him away and told him to stop it, and he apologized. That's when I noticed a stranger walking a dog coming, so I used that and said I needed to go and went to the main road. I thought I was safe, but no. The guy kept walking with me. I stopped and told him I wanted to part there and how it was nice to meet him again. He looked confused and said we have never met. He said about meeting on a night out just to get me to come. I then began saying, "Look, I have to go," when he cut me off, grabbed and pulled me near some bushes, saying, "Before you go, there's one more thing." I told him I needed to go and to let go of me, but he ignored it. The guy then pulled me, hurting my wrists, and kissed me again. He saw the bushes and said about having privacy, and I managed to shove him off and tell him no. He then grabbed me again and tried to take me to the bush, saying, "It'll only be a second," while I resisted. Some dog walkers came by and he stopped and pulled me to kiss me again, this time grabbing my breast. I shoved him and screamed. I said no, and just ran. My heart was racing. I was terrified. I thought he might have tried to do something to me. I kept looking back and he was nowhere to be seen. I ended up taking the long way home just in case. When I got in, I just started to cry. I thought something bad would have happened to me when I got a message from another account. It was him. He said about how lovely it was meeting me and how it was the best date ever, how I was the prettiest girl he'd ever kissed and that he would see me again, adding how he hoped I had a lovely time and that he showed me he was a gentleman, then adding how he was on my road. I just hid on the floor for the rest of the day. When I looked at his profile, I remembered where I had seen him before. He used to message my old Facebook account years ago with weird messages and creepy edits saying how he loved me. This whole event happened within an hour and a half.
So, this started about 3 years ago when I was 18. I was using Tinder when some usual rando texted me and we started talking. The usual, what are you doing, what are you up to, etc. Then the rando started to sound depressed about how everyone hated him and occasionally talking about how he should end it all. Me being the nice person that I am, I tried to find something about him that I could compliment and try to make him feel better. That sort of thing, or bring a smile to at the very least. And that's when things began to become heavy. Rando began to lash his anger, telling me that I'm a liar or a user and that I just wanted to make fun of him, and I tried to reassure him that my compliment was genuine. I tried to tell him that I hate to see people down and depressed and like to make them happy because it wasn't my usual nature. Now I had been in his shoes before with severe insecurities, so I know how he felt. After he finally began to feel that my compliments were real, he started to get really attached to me and started berating me with messages. He would send me like 20 messages in one go, and if I didn't reply in 5 seconds, he would be like, "Oh, I guess you find someone better to talk to. You get the rest." It began to get frustrating, and I could have just blocked him to relieve my headache, but I have anxiety and feared that he would turn up at my doorstep and do something drastic if I blocked him. He also started sending me nudes to grab my attention, to reply instantly to his messages, and it got worse and worse from here. Eventually, he told me that he would be in my town soon and talked about meeting somewhere, sometime, and doing something. I didn't reply, and he flipped out and started tapping all of my social accounts, Facebook messages, friend requests, Instagram follows. One night, I went out with some of my friends for a night out, and I forgot that he was in town for the weekend. He saw me walking down the street and came up to me and bawled his eyes out for not replying to him and begged me for my phone number and address and whether he could join us on our night out. And we politely refused. He followed us further and tried forcing drugs into my hand when we got to the bar. Infuriated at how clingy he was, I decided to go back home, only to realize that he boarded the same bus as me and vanished only after he saw the place where I lived. He started texting me on Tinder how he would find me one day and find my friends to get my phone number. This was it, and I finally blocked him. And I thought I was done with it. This whole experience had really put me off dating people who have high insecurities only out of fear that this experience would be repeated. But something like this would happen again. I have been trying to stop over-complimenting people too much out of the fear that this experience would happen again. It has been 3 years, and I haven't seen him since.
This story happened when I was 15. It's been almost an entire decade now, but I still think about it quite a lot. This is our situation. My brothers and I live with my mom. I'm the oldest of 3, and my mom generally leaned on me to get things done. This naturally turned me into an adult from a very early age. Even to this day, my mom talks about feeling guilty for having to thrust adulthood on me so early on. She thinks that I didn't have a childhood, and maybe she's right. As you might imagine, my dad wasn't really in the picture. He was an abusive drunk, and when I say abusive, I mean seriously abusive. Up until the time I was 10, he lived with us, and whenever he would get drunk, he would beat the life out of us. It was always terrifying. The only saving grace was the fact that he wasn't always drunk or had alcohol in the house. In fact, there were sometimes, months at a time, when he would go without drinking, and he was an otherwise pretty decent person. For all that was wrong with my dad, he would have probably been close to an ideal human being if he had not been for his rampant alcoholism and the demon inside of him that came out when he got drunk. The incident that got my mom to finally divorce him was horrendous. I had been in my room playing video games or something, and he was in the living room. My mom just got home from getting the groceries. He accused her of having an affair at the time, and of course, this wasn't true, but he didn't believe it. He kept screaming at her that she was lying. It escalated to the point that he pinned her down on the floor and said that he saw her nose growing, and then grabbed a screwdriver and cut into my mom's nose with it. There's still a scar from that day. Well, that all went down when I was about 10, so this is about 5 years later. My mom was bringing my 2 younger brothers on some kind of Boy Scout trip. They were both in the Boy Scouts and always felt left out because all the other kids had a dad. My mom's guilt drove her to volunteer and help out whenever she could, so she went with my 2 brothers for this weekend camping trip with the Boy Scouts. She really wanted me to go with them because she felt uncomfortable having me alone in the house. I insisted that I was mature enough to do it, and honestly, I didn't even have friends that I could party with if I wanted to. She eventually gave in and let me have my way. I remember being in my bedroom, playing with my PlayStation. It was a pretty typical Saturday afternoon, but then I heard a car pull up. I didn't know who it was at first, and I immediately got really panicked that I was going to have to call the cops. My bedroom window doesn't have a really good view at the driveway, so it took me a second, but after studying the part of the car that I could see, I recognized that it was my father's car. I was immediately mortified. I was on bad terms with him, and my mom had a really serious restraining order put on him after they had separated. I got really nervous, and I was not sure what I should even do. He didn't come into the house for a few minutes, and I immediately started wondering what he was up to. I did the only thing that I could think of and cracked my window so I could hear what was going on outside. I thought that if I could hear what he was doing, I would have a better idea. I immediately recognized that he was crying. His whimpering sound was really intense. I hadn't heard from him in years, and my mom said that we would never see him again. But here he was, crying in our driveway. He paced around for a few minutes before finally standing still. I could hear his crying getting louder. Then he screamed. All I heard was a gunshot. The second I heard the gunshot, I immediately knew what had happened. I ran outside. I looked down at my father's lifeless body on the driveway cement. Blood everywhere. As traumatic as it may have been, I didn't cry. I didn't act emotional or anything. I just called the police. They got there a few minutes later and took me into custody. They wanted to keep me safe and secure until they could contact my mom. The rest of the story played out exactly as you would imagine. My mom apologized profusely. I had to answer some questions to the police. Nothing out of the ordinary. I don't really know what to make of the situation. I don't have much sympathy for the guy, and part of me is kind of happy that he did it. But looking back, I just kind of wish that he had done it where I wouldn't have had to have witnessed it. The entire experience made me never want to go stay home by myself ever again. It's been a long time since this whole thing had gone down, and even now, if I have to stay home by myself, I will make an effort to leave the house or to invite a friend over. I won't stay there alone. A couple of years have passed since this entire situation, and I can't help but to think that it was all for the better. My dad was a seriously destructive human being, and I know this might sound terrible, but I just wish that he had done it sooner. For those out there that haven't lived with a toxic and negative parental figure, consider yourself extremely lucky. The tribulations that I had to endure at the hands of my father fostered a lot of rage inside of me. My mom is really good friends with one of the wealthiest people in our town. They have a daughter, my age. I don't have a crush on her or anything, but my mom has pushed me to ask her out before. Never did. Here's the weird thing about the situation, though. My mom and this friend, along with her daughter, all kind of act like their friend. Like a bunch of high school girls getting together to gossip. My mom works in a beauty salon, so I guess I understand why she likes to act that way, but it's still pretty weird nonetheless. There was one specific occasion when this woman and her daughter were going to visit New York City. They decided to invite my mom for some reason. I don't understand why. I guess they really were better friends than I had previously believed. But my mom decided to say yes. So it was just me and my dad at the house, but here was the thing. They didn't have a dad at home. Their house was going to be completely unsupervised for the entire weekend. I was in my early 20s at the time, so I guess they thought it would be a good idea to ask if I would watch the house for them, which I agreed to do. I didn't get paid or anything, but they said I was allowed to eat as much food as I wanted, and considering that they were rich, I thought, why not? This also gave me an opportunity to write some short stories. I always loved writing, and I published some of my stuff online sometimes. I think it was that Friday night when I was watching their house. They told me that they had 2 cats, but they were really scared of strangers, and I was probably not going to see either one of them the entire night. It didn't bother me. I just had to make sure that they had food and water, which they did. I was chilling at the kitchen table, pounding the keys on my laptop on my latest story, when, all of a sudden, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up from my computer to notice the ugliest cat I've ever seen in my life. Just imagine a hairless cat, but also morbidly obese and cross-eyed. It was honestly the strangest thing I've ever seen. Any one of those traits individually would have made a cat kind of cute, but seeing all of them thrown together in one pitiful excuse for a pet almost made me want to bust a gut laughing. I felt kind of bad for laughing so hard at this girl's cat, but it's not like I hurt it or anything. That had been a good break from writing, but then I got back into it. I remember being in the middle of writing a really interesting scene. This ghost was abducting the protagonist of the story. It's kind of a psychological thriller with a little bit of paranormal thrown in there. It's very spiritual and weird. I'm kind of a weird person. But that scene still sticks with me because as I'm writing it, I noticed something outside. There was a man in a hooded sweatshirt walking around. I sat at the kitchen table, stunned. I didn't know what to do. I felt the adrenaline burst through my veins. Fight or flight. Well, I figured that my car was outside, so running wasn't going to do me much good. And after a minute of rationalizing the situation, I had no proof that this person was out to do anything bad. For all I knew, this could have been a jogger. I got up close to one of the windows to watch this man. He seemed to be sneaking around. He wasn't coming toward the house I was in, so I figured that I was at least safe for the moment. But then I noticed him looking into the window of the house across the street. I can only assume that he was checking houses to see if people were home or not. Must have been an actual burglar. Just show up in the wealthy neighborhood and see who wasn't home. I don't know why he would do it at night, though. Looks as suspicious as he did. We live in a gun state, after all. And after a few minutes went by, and I could tell that there were people at home at the house he was checking out. By the time he realized, I noticed him do a 180. He was walking in my direction now. I was about to be face to face with this man. I saw him walking across the street and I immediately started to panic. I called the police as fast as I could and told them the situation, but they said it would be about 20 minutes before anyone could be here. I ran up to the attic to hide. I locked the door behind me. In retrospect, this was my biggest mistake. I should have turned on a bunch of lights and made it obvious that someone was here. I'm good at thinking, just not in the moment. The house must have looked uninhabited by the time I had gotten up to the attic. This made the house the perfect place to burglarize and steal everything. I was in the attic for about 10 minutes when I heard a window breaking downstairs. He was in the house. My heartbeat was inside of my forehead. He walked around the house for a few minutes. Thud. Thud. I heard the humongous boots marching across the wooden floors. He explored the house for a good while. I was really beginning to wonder where the police were. Typical. I heard him get close to the attic entrance, and that was the moment that pushed me over the edge. I started screaming at the top of my lungs that I had a gun. I told him that I was going to shoot his head off if he didn't leave the house immediately. And to my absolute shock, he ran away. I watched him run down the street as I looked on through the window. It appeared that this guy was even more scared for his life than I was. The police eventually got there, and I told them the entire story from beginning to end. They said that a couple of people had been reporting this guy in nearby neighborhoods, so this wasn't the first night he's been out doing this. The police explained that this guy hadn't been violent on any of the occasions they'd been called. They said it was about the 7th time this month that they have responded to a similar incident in a wealthy neighborhood. I guess he's going around looking for an easy way to make money. He hasn't been face to face with any of the homeowners yet, so maybe he isn't a violent criminal, just a criminal in general. I found the entire experience really interesting yet mortifying. Living through it was probably the most scared I've ever been. My mom, her friend, and their daughter didn't even come back early from their trip after it happened. I thought that was a lame move, but what do I know? For revenge, I ate every single pizza roll they had in the freezer, and if you're wondering, there were 3 bags of 90 pizza rolls. I ate over 270 pizza rolls that weekend, and I have no regrets. I sorely needed them after that borderline traumatic experience with the burglar. I'd gone the first 22 years of life without having any near-death experiences and hoped to make it through the rest the same way. Unfortunately, a month ago, I was put in such a terrifying position, I was afraid my life was about to end. The gist of the story is that I was the victim of mistaken identity. From what I've been able to gather in the interim, a former female employee was having a tryst with a fellow male employee, and her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, I'm still not sure, did not approve of the relationship. I want to start by saying that I never worked with or even knew the woman in question. Being a gay man, she wouldn't have been my type if I had. A couple of people that were around when she was told me that she and the man she was sleeping with had been fired a good 6 months prior to my employment. The unlucky coincidence appears to be that he and I shared the same first name and physical description. This had to have been why I was confused with him. A quiet evening in July, I was working, waiting tables, and just before 7:30, I got a single male sat in my section. He didn't look especially mean upon first sight, but he was a rather large man. I'm 5'11", and this man towered over me. Nothing was said at first. I took his drink order, and when I returned with it, he confronted me about the affair. "So you're the loser that's banging my girl?" I asked him to repeat what he'd said, and only got more hostility in return. "You heard me, boy. Ginger told me about your affair last night." His demeanor terrified me. I knew if he wanted, he could easily destroy me. Fighting had never been my forte, and a guy his size would have no trouble laying me out. I did my best to assure him I didn't know his girlfriend, but this only made him angrier. "Listen, you can deny it all you want, but she told me your name and what you look like. Saying you don't know her is just making me more mad." I could see the hate burning in his eyes. He spoke with gritted teeth, and spittle was beginning to come out of the corners of his mouth. My shaking had to have been obvious to him. I was on the verge of running away, but I didn't want to come off as any bigger a coward than I already was. "I'm sorry, sir. I in no way want to make you angry, but I swear that I've never met a girl named Ginger in my entire life. If she worked here, it must have been before I started. I literally only worked here for a few months. Any relationship I had ever had hasn't even included a female, if you get my meaning." It took a moment, but he caught on, and his scowl morphed into a smug grin in seconds. Telling a complete stranger about my preferences wasn't a discussion I wanted to have. However, I was out of ideas and decided on the Hail Mary. "You look like one of those deviants, but it's going to take a lot more to convince me than that." Playing that card must have been a bad idea. Although his voice had lowered slightly, he was balling his hands into fists, and this made my trembling worse. "Why don't you man up and admit you were balling my girl? You got a whooping coming either way. If you admit it, I might be a bit easier on you." It was as if he hadn't heard anything I'd said since he first accused me. The whole time this had been going on, I hadn't been aware of what else was going on around me. Someone in the restaurant, perhaps a patron, had notified my manager what was happening at this table. He came around just as the man had threatened to assault me and interrupted the conversation. "Excuse me, sir. I just overheard your threat toward my employee, and that is something I cannot allow customers to do. I'd like you to leave immediately, or I'll be forced to call the police." "You can call whoever you want. I don't care. I'm just here to tell this little wimp I'm going to give him a stomping for banging my Ginger." The manager's threat didn't seem to make any difference to the man. He was still just as mad before and wasn't showing any signs of leaving. "Sir, if you mean Ginger, The girl who left here more than 6 months ago, I can almost guarantee you that this young man never had any interactions with her. Now, there was another young man with the same name as him that I was forced to fire the same time as Ginger. I inform every employee at the time they are hired that relationships between employees are forbidden, especially when one of those employees are management. A rumor that they were violating this policy reached me, and when asked about it, they both confirmed it. Because of this, they were both terminated that same day. This young man is a new employee, and to my knowledge does not know either of these two. Maybe you should go back to Ginger and ask her to be more specific about the situation. Like I said, I can't have people coming into my restaurant and threatening my employees. You heard the real story, so now you can leave. And please do so now. The entire time my manager spoke, he never raised his voice, except for the end. Even then, he kept his composure. I think because of this, the man finally started to believe what I had told him. He stood up at the table, and he must have been at least 6'5". One more shudder of fear shot through me when I realized how massive he was. Okay, mister. I'm gonna go and have a talking to Ginger again. And if I find out you lied to me, I'm coming back and putting both of you down. The man then turned for the exit. I'd recommend you not do that, sir. My manager hit him with one more parting shot as he left, but the giant ignored it. Once he was gone, I could finally breathe again. After I took a few minutes to calm myself, I returned to work. That evening, and every shift I've worked since, our manager has made sure to walk with me to my car when I get off. He's had a permit to carry a handgun for some time, so this safety measure does make me feel secure. I don't think he's really worried about himself. Since we have our own parking area in the back of the building, not many other people come back there. I'm not even sure many other people know about it. I, nor anyone else, have seen the man since that night, but will probably continue with the escorts for the foreseeable future. I pray each day I leave for work that I won't see that monster ever again. If he does return, I'll update my post. However, I'm pretty sure if he was going to, he would have by now. Let's hope I'm right.
I have reactive attachment disorder, and as a result, I struggle with severe depression. However, I don't take any medication. I say that because I was going through one of the worst bouts of depression I had suffered in a year and a half. And I wasn't hallucinating because of the medication. It was Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning, October 13th to 14th. I had cried myself to sleep like I had done for however many hours before. When I woke up, it was 3:34 a.m. My cat Betty was walking around on the bed, and for some reason, my alarm on my phone was going off. I used the Sleep Cycle app, and the alarm was going off even though I had set it for 5:30 to 6 a.m. So I am frustrated that it decided to stop working correctly. Then, I hear that my computer in the living room turns on. I thought that my other cat Vader must have knocked the mouse while wailing over the desk. Then I see the light turn on from the monitor. What? I thought. I was kind of pissed, so I started grumbling about the cats walking around, alarms going off unreasonably, and Vader knocking things about. Until I turned on the bedside lamp and saw both cats are lying at the end of my bed. Looking into my living room, I froze. I was so confused. I was trying to make sense of it when I heard my main door open, like the screen door first, then the front doorknob. Then I heard someone move across the carpet. Unlike the movies, I jumped out of bed as quietly as possible, wondering how the hell was someone entering my apartment, as I sure as hell locked the front door to the apartment. I silently stepped into the hall and peeked around the corner. My cats nonchalantly decided to ignore the obvious home invader, thief, or murderer that had entered our home. I looked around the corner, and the door was closed.
lights were off, the monitor was off, but I could hear the computer running. I stood there frozen and listened for any noise for God knows how long, but I could not make sense of it at all and couldn't sleep the whole night. It wasn't a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know. But I have never been afraid of my apartment, and at that very moment, I felt very afraid. Very much alone. It hasn't happened again. Or maybe it has. I just don't know.
There was this gaming channel on YouTube that was getting popularity these days through videos of Minecraft. The player who was uploading all these videos seemed like he was a pro, and I had just stepped into the gaming world, so I was following many such channels to learn more about the games. My name is James Willie, and I'm a 16-year-old sole heir to my family's fortune. My parents died in an accident, leaving their entire wealth to me, but temporarily, my uncle is managing all the firms as my guardian. I know he won't try to take my position because there was a will that no matter the condition of any other single person were to take my position, the entire fortune would go to charity. So even he would not be able to do it, even if he wanted, because there were no loopholes in the will. I know my parents' death wasn't an accident, and they were aware of that possibility as well. I guess that's why he prepared for my safety in advance. As I was saying, I started playing video games and learning more about them. So the game I was into these days was Minecraft, and it was quite interesting. After coming back from school, I would either spend my time watching YouTube channels related to Minecraft or playing the game. One day, when I was watching the YouTube channel of the guy XS Gamer, who was getting popular through Minecraft, I noticed that he had never showed his face in public. Instead, he always wore different masks. It made me curious to find out the real identity of the gamer, so I watched every single video that he had uploaded so far, but his face was not shown in even one of them. I rewatched the videos multiple times, but could not find his identity, so I started to look for clues in those videos, and I noticed the fire tattoo on his left arm. There was another tattoo just near the fire tattoo that was hardly noticeable because the fire tattoo was taking all the attention. It was a tiny cloud, but I noticed it after observing him for so long. The next day, I was thinking about the Minecraft player in class and started to notice every single student, trying to deduce the possibility of someone among them being the player. I was in the cafeteria when I noticed some students talking about the game, which grabbed my attention. So I sat next to their table and started eating, while focusing completely on their conversation. I figured one of them was a pro player, and also had a gaming channel on YouTube. Since I wanted to figure out the identity of that YouTuber, I went straight to their table and approached them. They turned their head toward me and looked at me with a surprised and confused reaction, because I was the kind of guy who never talked to anyone willingly, despite being popular. Want to come over to my house and play the game? You can record for your channels there as well. As I said that, their faces lit up as if they just got a lifetime offer. They all nodded their heads yes in complete synchronization, which made me feel annoyed, but I still told them my address and invited them over for the weekend. Following Saturday, I asked my chef to cook the things that teenage kids would like, and he made some burgers, pizzas, nachos, burritos, etc. for them. They reached around 11 in the morning, and I welcomed them in. After that, I showed them my gaming room and the games that I had. They looked impressed with every single thing that was present in my house, and their expression seemed interested to me. So Carl, what's the name of your YouTube channel? I asked in a casual tone so that I don't look curious to them. It's Stinger MVP 109, he said in an excited tone. But as soon as I found out the name, I felt annoyed that I invited some useless kids into my house. But I didn't want to be rude, so I let them stay for a while. They had brought all their cameras and everything for recording the games while playing, and I let them. I exited the gaming room and paced back and forth in the hallway, starting to feel irritated and annoyed. I was thinking of kicking them out, but my butler suggested that I should behave like a good host. I went back in to ask if anyone wanted something to eat or drink, and they all said yes. So I ordered the servant to bring some juice and the food that was made for them. And as he was serving juice, he accidentally dropped the glass on one of the kids who was quietly observing others without getting involved in playing with the game. The servant started to apologize, and I asked him to leave. "I have a t-shirt your size. Come with me to the room, and I'll let you have it." After saying that, I instructed him to follow me. I went ahead and opened my closet. I picked one of the t-shirts that I had never worn and handed it to him. As I did not like anyone being in the room with me, I stayed there and watched him change. And that was when I noticed a fire tattoo on his arm. I started to look closely and said, "Nice tattoo you've got there." He smiled at my compliment and told me that it was something he had done a few years back. "Can I have a closer look? I've been thinking for a while of getting a tattoo, but I just cannot figure out which one." I walked closer while saying that, thinking I was interested in his tattoo, and he showed me his arm. That was when I noticed a tiny cloud-shaped tattoo that was hiding just below the first one. I smiled and said while pointing at it, "I guess I'll be getting this one. Hey, what do you say about coming over more often to play games with me?"
Since my very youngest days, I was treated as a golden child. My mother heaped buttloads of affection onto me and bragged to her friends how great of a son I was. I fear my younger brother missed out because she had already spent all of the love she had on me, so to speak. I joke about this, but I am somewhat serious at the same time. His upbringing lacked much of the praise and attention I was given. When I began playing in organized sports, the rest of the world joined in. Soccer came first. It all came so naturally, and before long, I was the top-scoring member of the team. Once I discovered football, everything else went by the wayside. Posters of Brady and Bledsoe covered my walls. My large, strong hands allowed me to grip and throw the ball with the power and precision not many twice my age had. All 3 years of middle school, I remained the starting quarterback. I did so well that by high school, I was playing on par with most seniors. My prowess in sports, of course, made me very popular in school. One of my teachers called me the big man on campus. I was never lacking the attention and approval of the staff and most of my fellow students. I didn't get a free ride, though. Without good grades, I wasn't qualified to play. Luckily for me, I had always been good at most subjects, except for perhaps math, in which I scored lower Bs. I had decided by my second year which college I would attend. I knew if I continued on my current path, I'd be quarterbacking for a professional team right out of college. To encompass all I had achieved, I quote a line I had once read that described a man as having the world in the palm of his hand. That's probably the best way I could describe the trajectory I had put upon myself. I was destined for success, and nothing was going to get in my way. I tell you all this in order to show just how far I was soon to fall, and exactly how much I was about to lose. I was a junior. I had already been named the starter on the varsity team. When not studying, I split my time between the weight room and practice. It was just before the third game of the season when Rosalind arrived. I had my mind off somewhere else when she entered our class. I still remember it like it was yesterday. A few of my classmates were grumbling about something, and it caught my attention. I happened to look up just as she was passing near me, and her beauty was breathtaking. I can honestly say with confidence you've never seen her equal in Hollywood. The rich silkiness of her auburn hair, to the sensual fullness of her lips and her porcelain skin, not an inch of her image had a flaw. I gave her my heart in that moment, and I knew nothing would equal her in my life. She took her seat at the back of the class. None of the shyness that usually existed in the newly arrived students showed in her actions. The room was hers completely now, and she knew it. My focus was on her for the remainder of the period. She had to have known. My gaze would have burned right through her had my eyes been lasers. This day marked the beginning of a long downhill slide, and I would give anything to experience every second of that time again. Concentrating on anything else was impossible. Class after class, only Rosalind existed. Practice was much the same. I wasn't on a football field. I was still in that class, soaking in every inch, every curve of her body. From then on, my only thoughts were about her. I used my charm to get her address from an office worker. That Friday evening, as I led the team to another victory, my only desire was for the game to end. Afterwards, I sat outside her house dreaming about her and I, walking hand in hand through the halls as everyone watched jealously. I resolved in that moment that I would own her body and soul until the end of my life. My first action upon arriving at school that following Monday was to locate Rosalind and bare my heart to her. I did just that, but her reaction wasn't what I'd envisioned. I spoke from my heart. Every word was true, but rather than collapse into my arms as I'd seen on TV so many times, she replied with 4 short words. I don't think so. I will admit to being disappointed, but her response left me with a ray of hope. She hadn't been cruel or mocking after all. Perhaps she had been playing hard to get. I knew I had to pursue her as a hunter pursues his prey. Maybe I would even be required to make a large sacrifice to prove my love. After all, that's the way it works in the great Hollywood films and novels. She would realize she belonged with me. I just needed to help her realize that. I searched my soul, day and night, for a way to make this happen. Suddenly it hit from out of the blue. If I gave up football, she would have to see how dedicated I was to her. That day I informed the coach of my decision. It went about as well as you would think. He was angry and yelled for almost an hour, but at the end of our meeting, he wished me well. I was elated. I had to tell Rosalind that very second. She didn't answer my text right away, but when she did, her only answer was, "Why?" The queasiness churned up in my stomach. Even after all I'd done to let her know I loved her, putting it into words still made me very nervous. "I did it for you," I said. My hands shook as they moved to push send. It was now or never. She would be left with no doubt to how I felt about her. After sending it, the time seemed to drag on forever. The hours passed with no word from her, and I couldn't take it any longer. I sped over to her house and waited outside her window. I watched as she changed for bed. Every curve, every line of her body remains with me to this day. I sent a new text to let her know that I was waiting. She appeared at her window within seconds. Seeing her in the nightgown made my heart race. There was only one reason she would let me see her this way. My mouth was dry with anticipation. I broke into a sweat. I expected to be met with soft words, but instead she began yelling, almost screaming. Her words didn't make sense. I was confused by her behavior. It only got worse when her father came outside. I tried to explain my love for his beautiful daughter, but he was deaf to my words. Rosalind began to curse me from her window, terrible things I don't dare repeat here. I never dreamed this could have happened. With every word, her curses knocked me lower and lower. It was a pain I'd not wish on anyone. I was so distraught I didn't hear the word police until it was almost too late. I fled just as I noticed flashing lights up the street. I lay down in my car as they passed and sped away as they pulled up to Rosalind's house. My sobs grew and grew until I was consumed by my grief. I laid curled up upon my bed, wailing uncontrollably. However, as my tears began to subside, another fire kindled inside. My anger roared by the second, until it consumed any sadness I once had. And by dawn, I transformed into some sort of beast. A monster I never knew existed in me had taken control of my body. I began to rage. I thought, no one says those things to someone who loves them. They know the power they have over them. The idea of punishment fleeted in and out of my brain, briefly at first, then more and more until it set root and fostered a plan for retribution. I see now just how far I had gone. My love, if that's what you can call it, had transformed from obsession into hate. The quickness in which this occurred still terrifies me. In that day and in that time, I could only think of one thing: revenge. She had to feel my pain. There was no other way she could learn what she had done. I entered the school that morning with a single, focused purpose. My anger had clouded my mind from considering the consequences of what I was about to do. I could see the terror in her eyes as I drew closer, and I could remember feeling satisfied by this. I said nothing. I just grabbed her by the throat, both hands gripping as tightly as possible, and I knew it wouldn't take long. My grip was strong and my hands were large. I was oblivious to the grabbing and pulling of others around me. Her face took on a dark red, then almost purple hue, and I knew it wouldn't be long now. I stared into her beautiful green eyes that I had dreamt of for countless hours, and was awed by them even as they filled with the streaking of blood. My adoration angered me even more. The next thing I remember was lying on the school floor being held down. The din of their yells seemed muffled. I was miles away, lost in the confusing pattern of the ceiling tiles above me. I'm not sure how long it was before I was told Rosalind had survived. It appeared I had been stopped before I was able to achieve my goal. This news didn't anger me, nor was I relieved. I had become numb. It's taken me many months to reclaim the identity I once was. I was terrified to feel anything. I'd become nothing more than a frightened child. I've been fortunate enough to be sent to an institution that focuses on therapeutic rehabilitation. I'm by no means fully healed, for the lack of a better word. There still are moments where I find myself giving over to my dark side. I don't necessarily blame the entertainment industry for the way they portray relationships or the pursuit of love in a wider context. I'm responsible for the way I handled the situation. Something inside of me is broken. However, in the same breath, I do question what impression they intend on presenting. A young, naive, and romantic man such as myself is inundated with talk of the so-called game and the premise of sacrificing for love, among other trite concepts. Without any real guidance from a more experienced adult or father figure, a young male often uses images from the popular entertainment around him. It is a discussion that should be had, considering more boys are growing up without a positive male role model in their lives. Please pardon me for going off onto my own path. I still require a lot of work. The purpose of writing this was to recount the events that led me to my current position. My counselor and I agreed that it would be a good idea to put my story and my feelings at the time on paper. It could serve as a motivating factor for myself and others to see how far I've come in my therapy. Now that I have, it is certainly encouraging to see the progress I've made. At the same time, it's shed light upon the darker side of my personality, and that has been a horrifying vision. Despite this, I'm confident I'm on the path to regaining my true self, and perhaps one day you'll recognize the brother you grew up with. I've just about written down everything I can recall from that time, and lights out is quickly approaching. I'll make a copy of this for my counselor, minus a little epilogue to you. Of course, I'll be sending you this version for yourself. Feel free to share it with your mom or anybody else in the family that may be curious. I've written Mom a short note just about regular stuff and sent it last week, so she should receive that soon. If you have the time, I'd like you to do something like we discussed and seek out the proper place on the internet to share this. All I ask is that you leave out my name, but I probably don't have to tell you that. I'm sure you don't normally tell people your older brother is psycho. I'd like young people to be able to read an authentic account of what goes on in the mind of someone like me without all the sensationalistic fluff. I don't seek notoriety or fame for what I've done. It is an inexcusable act against one I profess to love. My hope is that it can serve as a template for the young, a diagnostic instrument to help them recognize the same patterns in their friends or themselves and stop them before they get out of control. I'd like to think if more people had access to this type of information, things like stalking and the crimes that go with it may be able to be stopped completely, or at the least greatly reduced. I'll continue to do all I can to stem the tide from here. Perhaps, if enough on the outside can see this, we can create a better world. For everyone. Target was my favorite place to go shopping. I'm sad to say I don't think I can ever go back there, though. Sometimes when you have such a bad experience, it will ruin the love you had for a place or a store altogether, and that's what happened to me. It all started when I graduated college. I was a psychology major and I struggled to find a job. I live in a mid-sized city and there just wasn't anything appealing to me. There weren't any jobs in my field that I could get. The only psychology job I could even find wanted 10 years of experience, so I had to take whatever job I could get. I ended up working at some funky call center, and I say funky because it really was a complete dumpster fire every single day. The managers had no idea what was going on. My coworkers were some of the weirdest people I'd ever seen. Most of them didn't have a college education either, which made me feel really bad about myself. I had some really low confidence during this time, and I felt like a failure. I still lived with my parents and had a massive amount of student debt, and I was working at a call center making minimum wage. I had also let myself go during the last few months of my senior year in college. I was really stressed out trying to pass. I just didn't have time to make salad or go for runs anymore. I was feeling really down there for a bit, and this is where James comes in. He was a really weird guy that worked at the call center too. He had a goofy-looking mustache and was a bit of a creep. I definitely saw him checking me out a few times, and I even saw him look at other girls too. A little pervy, but I couldn't expect anything less from a place like this that I worked at. Oddly enough, James was the only guy at this place that was ever nice to me. Everyone else was so miserable to be there. James had been hired a couple of weeks before I got the job there, so I guess it just didn't have enough time to make me and James completely miserable yet. There was one time when I went out for a smoke break. James joined me and started flirting with me. He definitely had his problems, but there was something about getting a little bit of attention that did kind of make me feel special. I was always a very introverted person, and I hadn't had a boyfriend in over 2 years. It felt nice to be noticed. It wasn't long before we exchanged numbers and started talking a little bit outside of work. There were a few weeks there that I kept trying to get him to shave his mustache. I told him he would look a lot better. It took about 3 weeks to finally get through to him, but when he did, I was surprised. He was actually a really handsome guy under that caterpillar, and that was when I made up my mind. If he made a move on me, I wasn't going to say no. He never made a move on me though, and I was surprised because I was sending some pretty strong signals for him to do so. He just never did. Not even over text messages or anything. All he would ever do was flirt. It wasn't very long into that situation that I gave up on him. I figured he didn't like me. I mean, honestly, what else was I supposed to think? I downloaded Tinder like everyone else. I knew my situation was bad, and I secretly fantasized about hooking up with some rich guy. I didn't find a buff millionaire, but I did find a really nice guy eventually. We went on a few dates and started going out together regularly, and I really liked him. We're still together, by the way. But this is where things got weird with James. He started acting differently. He started doing more and more inappropriate things. I was friends with James on Facebook, and when I changed my status to an in a relationship, he did one of those emoji reactions, and he put an angry face. I remember seeing it and rolling my eyes. Typical men, I thought. They don't want you until you have someone else. Now, something James would always do with me is send slightly naked pictures. It wasn't like full frontal or anything like that, but he would take racy photos of himself getting out of the shower or changing and things like that. That was okay when I was single, but he just didn't stop. And these new pics were much more revealing, if you know what I mean. And I kept telling him that I was in a relationship and he couldn't do this anymore. He just wouldn't listen. He always said that he forgot, and I knew he was doing it intentionally. Things also got really awkward at work. There were quite a few things that he would do that were just freaky. For example, pens started disappearing from my desk. I didn't think anything of it at first, just that I was being clumsy. But one day I happened to walk by James's desk and notice all of my pens. He also followed me outside every time I went on a smoke break. He always played it off like he wasn't doing anything, but it was so obvious to everyone. Well, it was around the 6-month mark of me working at that funky call center. I had my performance review and I got a raise. I got an extra $1 an hour, which I was pretty happy about. I had a few $100s in savings and decided to treat myself to my favorite store, Target. I remember making a self-congratulatory post on Facebook about it. I even mentioned that I was going to treat myself to some new sheets from Target. I remember getting comments from some of my friends and former classmates. They all congratulated me, and I was really excited. Sure, I had a stupid job, but I was making the best of my situation. I remember getting to Target at about 6 or 7 on a Friday night. I went alone. I walked into the store and went over to the bedding aisle. I really wanted to pick out the best sheets for me. I am a little OCD about fabric and how things feel, so I was running my hands across the sheets to find the one that I liked the best. That was when something unexpected happened. I felt a kiss on my neck. I had been so wrapped up in feeling sheets that I didn't even notice who was behind me. I immediately thought it was my boyfriend. I mean, who else would randomly kiss me in public, right? Well, you guessed it. It was James. I turned around after he kissed me, and I was smiling. But my giddiness turned to disgust when I saw that it was him. My stomach dropped, and I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything. More of me was in shock than anything else. I know I must have looked so repulsed, but that didn't stop him from pinning me up against the aisle rack and continuing to kiss me. He shoved his entire tongue down my throat. It was honestly disgusting. This probably went on for about 3 or 4 seconds before I finally snapped out of it. I pulled my head away and slapped him across the face as hard as I could. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I fell down onto my back and I just sat there telling him to please leave me alone. He stood there, though, looking down at me, smiling. James was a really freaky guy. He started getting on top of me and kissing me again, and that was when I finally screamed at the top of my lungs. Someone who must have been in an aisle over or two overheard and came running. It was a man who looked like he was in his 30s. He ripped James off of me and threw him against the wall. After that, James took off. The man was really nice to me. He helped me up and made sure I was okay. He asked if I wanted to call the police, and I was so shocked I just told him no in the moment. And that wouldn't be the last time that I saw James. We still work at the same call center, and my God, it's pretty awkward. I know he still creeps on my Facebook, and he looks at me all the time. I'm honestly not sure what to do about it. I haven't even told my boyfriend about what happened, and honestly, I'm kind of afraid to. But I seriously might have to, one of these days. Most people don't even believe me when I tell them, but I have a job where I work from home. People in my area mostly work with cars or in the medical industry. There aren't many jobs where I live. Thankfully, I was able to land a decent paying job that let me work from my home office. It definitely comes with its struggles, but it is hands down the best job opportunity available to me right now. It isn't always perfect. It definitely comes with its pitfalls. Sometimes you have to sit at your computer even when there isn't any work to be done. It's also very easy to get distracted. But I think my biggest problem has to do with the house itself. It's kind of creepy. The house itself is an old Victorian, like really old. We're talking mid-1800s. A family friend owned the house and sold it to me for a very fair price, basically gave it to me. I was super excited because it meant I got a nice big house to live in by myself along with my girlfriend. I'm a natural loner and I don't really care for social interaction, so I had a nice big house all to myself and girlfriend and job where I work from home with very minimal social interaction with other people. That was basically my ideal life. But the house's age meant that it was going to be scary at times. And I don't mean with ghosts or anything like that, but sometimes I hear the house settling in or making noises that I can't explain. I've actually had quite a few instances where I'll be sitting down and doing some work and then out of nowhere, I hear a noise that I just can't rationalize. I go exploring throughout the house only to find that nothing has changed. It's as ominous as it is frustrating. I did just about what anyone else in the world would do. I started to use background noise to drown out the disturbances. First, I tried those quiet instrumentals on YouTube. You know, the ones that last 5 hours and they're supposed to put you at ease or something. It didn't really work for me because I couldn't get my computer to be loud enough to drown out all the noises. It was also not very good at keeping my attention. There was one week where my work was really slow and there wasn't a whole lot to do. I still had to sit at my computer though. There was an understanding that I was allowed to basically do anything I wanted as long as I was available to my coworkers if something came through that needed to be done. I didn't quite know what to do with this time and just started watching documentaries on YouTube. It was actually pretty fun. I learned a lot. And so that next week, when things started picking up again, I just instinctively turned on a documentary. I wouldn't be able to have all of my focus on it, but it was a lot better than having some ambient noise. It actually helped distract me from the sounds of the house. I guess I just didn't have enough mental focused energy to notice any of the other sounds going on around me, if that makes any sense. Well, it had been about 2 weeks of me watching documentaries while I worked. Everything seemed to be good. Until one Friday morning, I started work at 8 and this must have been around 10. I was sitting at my office chair working while I listened to a documentary about certain conspiracy theories when all of a sudden, I heard an abrupt banging noise coming from upstairs. Like I had said, I hadn't been distracted by any noises for a while by this point, so the fact that I noticed this noise meant that it was probably serious. My fight or flight kicked in. You might laugh at me, but when I work, I keep a knife next to me. I ran upstairs with the knife and looked around for any suspicious noises. The banging had stopped, and I didn't know where it had come from. I knew what section of the house that I heard it from, but there didn't seem to be anything out of place. I stood there for a few moments, and then I heard it again. It happened right on the other side of my door. I immediately braced myself for there to be some kind of animal or something trying to get in. I didn't really know what to expect. I opened my door to see that the screen door had not been properly closed. My girlfriend didn't close it all the way when she left for work that morning. It was also pretty windy that day, so it was just going back and forth causing a banging noise when the wind got bad. This was kind of a breaking point for me. I didn't want to live my life in constant paranoia and fear of some kind of attacker coming into my home. We live in a safe area. There's never been a serious threat. And I have run around my house with a knife way too many times now. I honestly felt kind of stupid, so I made a decision. I was no longer going to assume that someone was breaking in if and when I heard a sound. I put the knife in my dresser in my bedroom and decided that I was going to just be in to work while I was working, except for my documentary, of course. So there I was the next week. It happened on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my office doing exactly what I had set out to do. I was working, ignoring the noises and listening to a documentary. I remembered the exact part of the documentary I was on when I heard it. The sound was the loudest sound I had heard in the house up to that point. At first, I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I need to fight against this paranoia. The sound continued, and I couldn't take my mind off of it. After about 5 minutes of listening to what sounded like rummaging and walking, I went upstairs to check. Bear in mind, I didn't have any weapon on me, and I was expecting some kind of reasonable explanation. When I got to my kitchen, I saw that the front door was wide open. The cabinets were all open, and there was a strange man rummaging through my stuff. I didn't notice until after the fact, but he had been eating something. I remember screaming at him. I don't remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "What are you doing in my house?" obviously. And then he just ran off. Didn't say a single word. He took a loaf of bread with him, but I don't think he took anything else, other than what I had eaten before I came upstairs. I reasoned with myself that he must have been some sort of homeless man or something. I don't know why else he would steal a loaf of bread from a very ordinary-looking house. And this was the worst thing that could have happened. On some instinctual level, it had proved all of my worst fears right. There was some kind of danger in my house, and of course, it was the one time when I didn't have my knife on me. I lucked out that he didn't try to hurt me or anything, but it's still horrifying to see nonetheless. I just work at a local coffee shop now. It's honestly my only way to stay sane.